How's it going, guys? Shit. It is really not, Okay, I guess what I can do is I can put on. Why is this going so slow? Okay. Start off with this. We're gonna watch a lot. Well, not a lot. We're probably gonna watch a decent amount, though. Let's, get rid of the ads, though.
Imagine yourself, but if you had made a slightly different choice at a key juncture in your life. Went to a different school, didn't break up with this or that
Hey, I'm
partner,
good. How
didn't
are
quit
you?
that job,
Fuck you, I'm out.
or kept smoking. Would
I'm,
it still really be you, or would the radically different sequence of events
I'm currently working on
born to
the
your
Fort
alternate
Infantry,
choices make you almost unrecognizable to yourself? This incredibly unnerving question is asked, among others, in the brilliantly written hit series Severance. In it, the main characters go through a particular procedure which renders their work self, who they are at work, completely severed from their home self. You go into an elevator and
I hope
boom,
you're doing
no
as
idea
good
what's
as
going on
well.
at home. You clock out, boom, you have no idea what just happened at work. But, and this is important, your work self, when you clock back in on the next day, remembers everything they had experienced on the previous workday. In a way, the first day you clocked in, the worker self was born. The work environment, a satirical, oversimplified version of an office where their daily task is to press random buttons and chase weird symbols on the screen without knowing why, becomes their world, the only thing they have ever known. Their colleagues, the only people they will ever meet. So, okay, great sci fi setting, work alienates, blah, blah, blah. YouTube essay number 67,349. Is that what we're going to be covering here? Well, no. Instead, let's treat the show's premise as a thought experiment and dive into a much more interesting dilemma. One on human nature versus nurture, or better yet, how much would you change? Would your worldview change? Would your moral compass and identity change if you had two versions of yourself cut between two systems, two environments, informed by two differing ideologies? The most famous and arguably most insatiable cringe-inducing argument that gets thrown at people who fantasize about a post-capitalist world is, what about human nature? That simple question posits an even simpler view of human consciousness and decision-making. It says man is flawed through his greed, jealousy, and selfishness, and that as such, he would destroy and corrupt any system which doesn't utilize those very flaws. The way capitalism, for example, does with greed, by throwing us in the gladiatorial arena,
Are you not entertained?
or to be more realistic, a children's sandbox of the free market where the greediest win. The human natur brain king that probably got that argument off of Reddit, that got it off of 9gag, that got it off of 4chan, who probably got it off of Mein Kampf or something.
And so on and so on.
See the current way we organize our economic states, called capitalism, as the final step of human evolution. They proceed to quote Churchill saying,
If you are not a liberal when you are 25, you have no heart. If you are not a conservative by the time you are 35, blah, blah, blah. I never even said this, all that. I did say racist things about Indians.
or use terms my 14-year-old niece considers obsolete at this point, like the end of history, inadvertently positing that this megamall of a civilizational blip on our long history is supposed to be our peak. Their lack of vision would probably make Ray Charles call them blind. It would be absolutely fair to discuss and debate human nature as it was thousands of years ago, as we were first crawling up on two legs. A human nature informed almost exclusively by what our genetics, our bodies, hormones, and brains told us to do. Many fine thinkers from John Locke to Hobbes and all the way up to the most contemporary of philosophers obsess with this question. But to discuss human nature by analyzing the modern human is so brashly unscientific, it would rival that of flat earth theory. Why? Because experiments conducted in an uncontrolled environment aren't experiments, they're guesswork. The modern human psyche is informed by thousands, if not millions, of internal and external factors which inform their sense of identity, normalcy, and for the lack of a better word, nature. In a way, there is nothing natural about humans as they are today, and there hasn't been from the moment we altered our behavioral pattern to those of animals. Put as simply as possible, we live in a society. But no, seriously, the idea that we can extract what is natural instinct and what is a, quote, consequence of our environment in modern society would be like looking for a needle in a planet-sized haystack. Are you greedy because there's something rotten at your core, or because the modern sense of accomplishment is tied to the pursuit of wealth? Are you jealous because it's coded in us to be, or have thousands of hours of consumed content taught you that there's tons of people out there whose lifestyles you'll never reach or achieve? Are you bigoted because it's natural to fight for your own in-group, or are you just brainwashed by divisive, hateful ideology? Not knowing the exact answer to those questions is exactly the point. No matter how many hypotheses exist on the tabula rasa, the clean slate, the pre-character creation screen version of ourselves, they will likely remain just that, hypotheses. But okay, you don't have to trust my word for it. Let's look at, quote-unquote trademarked real science.
You do know what they say about twins, secretly parted, don't you?
Bruh.
Over the last few decades, many social experiments were conducted on twins separated at birth, or at least at an incredibly young age. Scientists wanted to determine hundreds of differing environmental influences on individuals with extremely similar genetics. If you raise the same kid in two spots, how much do they differ? Basically, to answer the age-old question of if life quality equals genetics x environment, how big is one versus the other? The answers might be a bit more complicated than what we would expect, but I wouldn't call them exactly surprising. To quote Siegel, an expert on the topic, twin studies are simple, very elegant design. Holding the genetics constant allows researchers to study the age-old question of nature versus nurture, what aspects of a person came from their DNA and which come from their environment. There was a time when scientists tended to think one or the other factor was more important to development, but they have since come to realize how limiting it is to continue our understanding of behavior, health, and identity to this either-or dichotomy. Quote, nature and nurture work in concert, Siegel says, affecting every measurable human trait. In one study, where two sisters separated at birth between the UK and the US, the results were rather self-explanatory. When it comes to general intelligence, the twins' IQ scores of 93 for the US and 82 for the UK were in the average and low average ranges respectively, yet very different. Overall, the twins' differences were more frequent than their similarities. Differences were most apparent in general intelligence, troop completion times, ideational fluency, psychomotor completion times, and medical health. Similarities included mental status, job satisfaction, and social support. The personality data yielded mixed findings, and the twins approached their relationships with one another from differing perspectives, but were pleased to have met. In general, behavioral and physical differences between the twins appeared linked to genetic factors and to UK's childhood illnesses. The way they ended up living, which is arguably the most important part though, was arguably radically different. But in another case, from '79, Jim Springer and Jim Lewis, the Jim twins, were reunited at age 39 after not knowing the other existed. As described in Siegel's book on the identical Jim twins, born together, reared apart, both had been adopted and raised by different families in Ohio, just 40 miles apart from each other, so not exactly very different environments. But despite their separate upbringings, it turned out that both twins got terrible migraines.
Both explained their same mixed headache syndrome in exactly the same way as if someone is beating on their head with a hammer.
Bit their nails, smoked Salem cigarettes, drove light blue Chevrolets, did poorly in spelling and math, and had worked at McDonald's and as part-time deputy sheriffs. But the weirdest part was that one of the Jim twins had named his first son James Allen, the other had named his first son James Allen. Both had named their pet dogs Toy. Both had also married women named Linda.
You guys.
Linda, listen,
Linda.
Then they got divorced and both married women named Betty. Now, this might sound rather sensationalist because, let's be honest, it is. Even them, two men with the same genetic code living in a relatively similar environment and having gone through incredibly similar life events, had their differences. For starters, one divorced Betty and married a woman named Sandy, which, as Siegel jokes, must have caused worry for the other still married Betty. But it gets even more complicated. The reasons why identical twins, even very young ones, have differences at all, not just in life outcomes but temperament, taste, physical traits, can come down to random chance, but it can also be traced to how each sibling's identical genes are expressed. Basically, just having certain genes doesn't mean they will influence your life. These microscopic variations in lifestyle can lead to radical differences in a person's health, personality, and even appearance. The study of how this works is known as epigenetics. For example, one can be influenced by lifestyle and diet, as we said. Researchers are also looking at epigenetics to explain exactly why some twins start out with the same characteristics but dramatically diverge as they age, and perhaps why one twin may suffer from an illness while the other one is not affected at all. In a study published in the National Academy of Sciences, 80 pairs of identical twins ranging in age from 3 to 74
2
were
days, by
studied.
the way.
They discovered that 35% of twins revealed a difference in genes. The study suggests that genes are regulated by epigenetics and that as twins aged, their DNA also changed. Their life basically started modifying their genetic code. To me, that is absolutely wild. Researchers believe that external factors could dramatically change certain expressions of genes by causing them to become, for example, irregular. While the epigenetic debate of what makes us who we are is still undecided, researchers lean to the idea that all external and internal influences encourage and affect our behavior. And because of twins, science is taking closer steps in uncovering the truths of said human behavior. Quote, no longer is it nature versus nurture, but nature via nurture, writes Dr. Matt Ridley in The Agile Gene, How Nature Turns on Nurture. Quote, you will have to enter a world where your genes are not puppet masters pulling the strings of your behavior, but puppets at the mercy of your behavior. A world where instinct is not the opposite of learning, where environmental influences are sometimes less reversible than genetic ones, and where nature is designed for nurture. Basically, in normal people language, while using separated and non-separated twins in a search for answering whether environment or genetics influence someone's outcome, financial, health, what we believe, we found out far more about ourselves than we might have expected. While the set of traits we are born with does help set us out on one path or another, while it may influence some of our preferences and traits, the moment we leave our parents' womb, the moment we start interacting with the outside environment, our genes, our nature begins to alter and adapt, building up unique individuals who transform the world, while the world, in a very literal and philosophical sense, transforms them. So, next time someone says humans are wired to behave in a particular way and use that as a reason to why the world can't change, remind them that the world changing would change how we are wired.
Keeping your pearly whites pearly white isn't easy, especially when your husband is the god of wine.
I've done it again. Babe, you have to try this.
No, look at my teeth.
But the legs on this one are almost as fine as yours.
Heyo! Okay, fine.
Savor it. Savor it?
Cause look, who avoids good things just because they stain your teeth?
Mortals.
I only smoke when I drink. You have to tell him.
I have to tell him.
Yeah, you should tell him.
You can try various whitening solutions, but just like my friends, they all have their problems. Whitening strips could cause sensitivity. Dentist treatments are expensive. I'm married to the god of wine, not the god of money. Activated charcoal? More like activated tooth damage. Oh, and there's Facetune, but trust me, people can tell.
You know that doesn't work, and plastic straws are banned in this household.
I told her, grapes don't cry when they get crushed, but they do whine.
Party sucks.
Luckily, I found out.
Okay, so I could like.
You're welcome.
I'm just gonna start making all of them, you know.
Universe's Instagram account, along with like a million others. Snow is the world's first at-home wireless system that whitens your teeth and improves your smile in as little as 9 minutes. You just brush your teeth, apply the whitening serum, throw in the wireless waterproof mouthpiece for up to 30 minutes, and boom, a whiter smile.
You look like a goddess.
I feel like a goddess.
Am I
Snow is
like-
the most
hold on.
effective at-home whitening system.
I'm such an
thanks to its
idiot.
proprietary whitening serum and it's patented.
Alright, hold on. Oh yeah, that's right. I could literally just buy fucking.
Did you know that millennials are the least wealthy generation, despite the fact that they currently represent the largest group in the workforce? Business Insider reports that boomers are 10 times wealthier than millennials. It gave birth to the term generational wealth gap, which describes the difference between the amount of wealth accumulated within one generation relative to the wealth accumulated within another generation. By wealth, we mean savings, investment, and other forms of assets, including real estate. Productivity has literally never been higher, yet the buying power of younger workers is nowhere even near to that of boomers or even Gen Xers. This sort of rhetoric is usually used as a tool to inspire division amongst generations, implying the boomers owe us something or that millennials are waiting around for a handout. This is baby logic, and saying goo goo gaga goo goo would make more sense. The main difference, talking about the Western Hemisphere here, between generations, between one decade or another, is the economic environment in which those people exist. Economic downturns, global conflicts, or internal strife lead to greater toxicity in the market and therefore inhibit people's ability to save and to prosper. Sure, that's true, but these problems are constantly pitched to us as temporary, and yet they are arguably the greatest constant of this system. Put the words capitalism and stability together, and what you will get is a joke because that doesn't exist. The continuous, unavoidable deterioration of the system due to its lack of favorability to the majority through greater wealth concentration in a tiny minority is no longer able to sufficiently explain its own reason for existence to the masses. It has, in quite a literal sense, created radically different environments and therefore radically different outcomes for the same peoples, in the same
we're gonna
land,
watch
and the same environment, and with the same cultures and extremely similar ideologies. There is no greater proof of the impact of our environment on our social and financial performance throughout our lives than that of the generational wealth gap. Our parents married earlier, had families earlier, bought their houses earlier, and accrued a hilariously lower amount of debt than we did. Why? Because marriage costs less, having kids costs less, houses cost 30 bloody billion times less. Billy Jr. unavoidably has quite a bit of Billy Sr.'s nature in him, but that never did, nor does it now, mean he will end up achieving what Sr. did before him. The environment breeds success, and therefore the environment must be altered to allow for success. And yes, some do make it even in the harshest of places, but this exception to the rule in its infinitely tiny proportion is exactly the proof of the definition. The passing of time has altered what we define as normal human behavior, what we define as ethical and moral, what is defined as human nature. Claiming it can't change and yet being vastly different to your parents is some truly, truly clown shit.
It is okay to be so stressed and overwhelmed that you feel like you need to talk to someone about it. And by that, I mean going to therapy. Lately, the transition from college into post-grad and working full-time and
Now, let's bring back the allegory with the characters from Severance we mentioned at the beginning. Same people, totally different environments equals significantly different people. Sure, characters A, B, C, and D are different genders, ages, ethnicities, come from different parents, and that, to an extent, does slightly influence them and their behavior. Call that their human nature, their inherent drives. But it's the environment and people in said environment that end up actually molding them into totally unique people as contrasted to their out-of-work versions. We touched on how our genetics react to the environment. We touched on how the functionality of the environment influences our financial outcomes. But we left the most important aspect for last. What we spend the majority of our waking hours doing. Work. And how work, just like in good old Severance, can completely change our sense of self, normalcy, and drive. So who better to talk about work than Marx? To quote, "A spider conducts operations that resemble those of a weaver, and a bee puts to shame many an architect in the construction of her cells. But what distinguishes the worst architect from the best of bees is this, that the architect raises his structure in imagination before he erects it in reality. At the end of every labor process, we get a result that already existed in the imagination of the laborer at its commencement. He not only effects a change of form in the material on which he works, but he also realizes a purpose of his own that gives him the law to his modus operandi, and to which he must subordinate his will. And this subordination is no mere momentary act. Only because of that is this activity free activity. A strange labor reverses the relationship so that man, just because he is a conscious being, makes his life activity, his essential being, a mere means for his existence. In rather crude, normal people terms, he posits an incredible observation, that man, when it comes to his labor, his work, is different to animals because of why and how he performs it. He can only remain true to his nature when he is allowed to express that labor by choice, and not out of alienated necessity, like an animal. To further quote, "In fact, the realm of freedom actually begins only where labor, which is determined by necessity and mundane considerations, ceases. Thus, in the very nature of things, it lies beyond the sphere of actual material production. Just as the savage must wrestle with nature to satisfy his wants to maintain and reproduce life, so must civilized man, and he must do so in all social formations and under all possible modes of production." In a funny twist of irony, the system which we presumably cannot change because of our nature is a system which drives us furthest away from said nature. When labor feels purposeless because we are one in a billion cogs of a machine of unimaginable scale, when labor feels stolen because we get cents on the dollar for what we create, when the world our parents praise no longer welcomes us, it doesn't matter even if we disregard what the economists, geneticists, or philosophers from this video think about human nature. Because we, just like an animal struggling in its current environment, must either evolve or lay down in a grave of our own making. Human nature as an excuse for inaction is not only unscientific, but also pathetic. Well, that was different. If you'd like to support this channel, consider donating over on PayPal or Patreon. For the price of less than one can of beer, you'd be helping the channel stay as independent as possible. If not, then hit all those buttons you see on screen, like, subs, bells. It helps the channel fight the algorithm. Now that we got that out of the way, I'd like to thank all the wonderful Tavarishi without whom this channel wouldn't even be able to run. Especially Combining Comrade, Jason Harrison, Romy Senpai, Holden Fast, String Bebop Cola, Abraham, Ron Wayne, Fred Drennan, Display Name, Red American, Strip, 3NB1, Probably Frank, Thank you, Kiss.
Alright, let's watch Understanding Marxism by Prager U.
Oh, God.
Why does anyone still care about Marxism? Karl Marx has been dead for well over a century.
Hell yeah.
Everywhere Marxism has been tried, it has left death and destruction.
Hell
So
yeah,
right. Unlike capitalism, which is no deaths. Never forget, if famine, food shortages happen under a communist organization, that is because of communism's failure. But of course, if people, like the 14 million people that die every year as a consequence of famine, when capitalism has created a surplus of food, an abundance of food, those people are dying because they don't have their bootstraps, okay? That's it. Remember, communism responsible for any death and all deaths. Capitalism responsible for no deaths.
Zero.
I've made the greatest argument of all time. There you go. You can't deny it.
Sorry.
That's the best argument, dude.
Don't
Guy
make
has
the
the
rules.
expanse hair. Yeah, this is the least reliable narrator, okay?
Last 1,000 years comes close to the amount of tyranny, terror, and mass murder brought about by Marxist regimes. Yet Marxism lives. It may present itself today as postmodernism, multiculturalism, feminism, environmentalism, or critical race theory, but it's still Marxism. So, there must be good reasons why it has endured, even flourished in the face of unremitting failure. Say
But
what
is
you will
it-
about Marx the economist. He was a master psychologist. He recognized that there are many people in every society who are motivated by envy and resentment. Marx
Jesus
speaks
Christ.
directly to them. He tells them that the responsibility for the misery in their lives belongs to the capitalist system.
Dude, this stuff is awesome because, like, no one has read any of Marx's work. So you could just, like, say whatever you want about Karl Marx, and people would just be like, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, no. This guy just fucking owned the entire school of thought. He owned all the work that came before by saying Marxism is about jealousy. And the more jealous you are, the more Marxist you are. That's great. Fucking awesome. No, like, relations to the means of production and how societies are designed around commodity production. No fucking historical materialism. None of that. It's just Marxism, envy. And the more envious you bitches are, the more Marxist you get, motherfucker. Which is, by the way, the saddest thing because, like, unironically, some people do operate like that on the internet. It's a bad look. I'm just saying. Jealousy's a disease, love. Get better soon, yeah?
Marxism assures us that this socialist utopia is close at hand.
Bro, look how
available
close this
to all,
is.
not in some distant future or in the next life, but here and now.
Hold on.
All we have to do is overcome one little obstacle: human nature.
Quite literally, it is the exact opposite. The understanding is that the contradictions inherent to capitalist society, which Marx was very much a fan of. He was a capitalism stan, I guess. I mean, he wrote a fucking whole book about it. He definitely wrote a lot about capitalism. The idea is that the inherent contradictions between the two classes will inevitably have to resolve itself, and that socialism will be the next evolutionary stage of mankind rather than fucking human nature. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of fucking takes against the idea that greed is a part of human nature. That the only reason why we think greed is a part of human nature is because we are living in a capitalist organization of the economy. That greed being a part of human nature under capitalism is like thinking that the black lung is a part of human nature because you work in the fucking coal mines, okay? That's kind of the point, that it's not about greed and human nature at all. Greed not being a part of human nature. Holy fuck. Why? How did they do this? Like, it's just, I mean, I guess this guy's a college professor, chat. He's a college professor.
Marx expressed his deepest views on this subject in his economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844. They can be summed up in one phrase.
Oh, dude, let's go.
The enemy of being is having. In other words, the desire to own things makes you a bad person.
That's what? Oh, it's so good. It's so good. Greed is bred from inequality. Inequality is man-made. Brother, you never had a dipshit college professor? No, it's just like funny that this dude is literally... No, Prager U is not a real university, but he actually teaches at Clemson, which is, as far as I know, a real university, okay? He's a professor of political science at Clemson University. This guy who's just like making shit up.
However,
Make Shit
you're
Up
not-
University is doing this. By the way, dude, this is how much reactionary politics has staying power, dude. This is literally no different than, like, people on Twitter, dude. Leftists on Twitter believe this. That's the worst part. That's what fucking kills me. Like, leftists on Twitter unironically are just like, yeah, dude, that's true. You are a bad person for owning things, and fuck you, actually. Like, that's it. That's how much it kills me when I see fucking leftist people, like, repeating ridiculous right-wing reactionary framing that they've taken on from the left.
The blame belongs to capitalism. The most common interpretation of Marx's philosophy suggests that he opposed capitalism because it creates an unjust world of inequality, exploitation, and class conflict.
Wait, he's just gonna move on from that as like wait, hold on. Wait, he just left. Okay, that part was correct. Why is he just left that there and just moved on? Is he gonna say like that's a bad thing? Like why that attitude is wrong or something? Wait.
Because it creates an unjust world of inequality, exploitation, and class conflict. Marxism, according to this view, is all about equalizing income and social status. This is
What?
true.
No, it's not!
No,
What
it's
are you
not.
saying? What the fuck? Dude, what? Yeah, Marxism is about having a flat fee. Everyone needs to get paid equally. Did I misunderstand what he's saying?
Marxism, according to this view, is all about equalizing income and social status. This is true, but it
This
doesn't
is
go
true.
far enough. Marx saw the accumulation of material wealth as dehumanizing. The more money and material possessions one acquires, the more estranged one is from his true humanity. In the philosopher's socialist paradise, one gets to eat, drink, and go to the theater free of charge and without having to earn a living. Best of all, you get to do it without the guilt of being a moocher. All
Hell
you
yeah,
have
brother.
to do is enjoy yourself. Or, as Marx put it, you can do one thing today and another tomorrow. Hunt in the morning, fish in the afternoon.
I mean, this is correct. He
This
did
part
say
is,
this,
yeah.
Except this is about having additional fucking free time for self-fulfilling activities as a
Bruh.
consequence of like your control over your own fucking labor and the control over the means of production. Because as it stands currently, when you look at productivity increasing as a consequence of technological achievements in a way that even Marx could not have fucking foreseen, you still see wages remaining stagnant, and you still see the same fucking 8-hour workday and 5-day work week. Okay. Regardless of the fact that technological achievements should have opened up a lot of free space and a lot of free time for individuals. But it didn't. You want to know why? It only improved productivity of the fucking average worker. And that made it so that you could fit more work actually into the fucking 8 hours a day that you're working and the 5 days a week that you're working. Because we have no control over our own destiny. We have no control over our own societal organization. We have no control over any of that when we have no fucking power as workers, okay? So, because of that, every time there's technological achievements that occur, it's used basically against you.
And rear cattle in the evening. Yes, rear cattle in the evening. That's how in touch Marx was with reality. But who cleans out the sewers? Does the dirty jobs that keep a society functioning? Ironically, in the evil capitalist society, the sewer cleaner freely chooses to take on his job.
Wait. Wait, who takes on the fucking sewer cleaning job in a capitalist society? They freely choose it? No, they don't. They fucking don't. That is such a lie, dude. I like that when he's talking about like capitalism, it's like, oh yeah, he freely chose to do this, right? He freely chose to do this. Like, this was his own desire. Like, no, this is not his own fucking desire. He is brought into the system where subjugation is a necessity, and basically he has to work for subsistence for the rest of his fucking life, and that every other facet of his existence is expensive as fuck. So he has to take on whatever job he can, because the only incentivization structure is revolves around not starving and dying.
Ironically, in the evil capitalist society, the sewer cleaner freely chooses to take on his job. In the socialist paradise, coercion is almost always required.
No, he literally is saying under capitalism, like, they freely chose it, but there has to be coercion. No, dog, the coercion in that circumstance would be like any single person in any single job that they have more of an ownership over what they're doing. More of an ownership over what they're doing. They choose their hours better. They have the capacity to democratically assign however many hours they're going to be fucking working in these jobs. They get better pay as a consequence of that, because these are jobs that normally would be way more expensive to fucking complete in a situation where like no one would choose to do it. It's exactly the opposite. It's coercion. Obviously, someone has to clean the toilets is like one of the main fucking problems, right? And numerous people have come up with different solutions for it. But ultimately, what I always say is that no matter which way you do it, having more ownership over your own fucking workplace, having ownership over your means of production will allow you to want to do that, because it's positive incentivization. Recognizing that you are valuable, and without you, the fucking cogs don't turn, okay? And doing it because it's something that someone has to do, and getting fairly compensated for it is precisely the way to do it. People owning cleaning businesses would not go away with communism. The labor would just be owned by those who cleaned. Yeah, it's just like, it's a very strange attitude to have. Like, I mean, think about like pool cleaners and shit. You know what I mean? They all fucking unironically operate as like self-owner. Like they all have their own fucking businesses. You know what I mean? Like one guy usually doing it. You can do that.
Turn out to be megalomaniacs like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Castro, Pol Pot, and Hugo Chavez. They were the ones who brought Marx to life and in the process caused tens of millions to suffer and die.
Dude, liberals have no fucking analysis skill, dude. They just don't have any, like, bone in them. It renders them useless when you need to, like, talk about material realities. Like, they just have to be like, no, it's because they were narcissists, dude. Like, it always has to be some, like, weird, intangible, idealistic thing. Like, some spiritual problem. Okay, you can stop justifying the millions of deaths now. I'm not. 14 million people die of famine when we literally have an abundance of food on this planet right now. 14 million people die of famine-related diseases and famine. This is before we even talk about imperialism. This is before we talk about the many other reasons, the many other ways that people are fucking murdered pretty much under capitalism. And you turn around and you go, you can stop justifying the millions of deaths now. I'm poking, bro. Good one, dude.
Contrary to Marx's claims, work freely chosen brings both money and dignity.
No one is freely working under a capitalist organization of the economy. That's not true. A budget shortfall is built into your existence. In America, this is doubly true. Ultimately, you only work because if you don't work, not have money to put clothes on your back, to put food on your table, and a roof over your head. That fear, the fear of the structural violence of poverty, is what keeps you going.
To him, self-interest turns everyone into Ebenezer Scrooge, greedy, grasping, and unfeeling. Not only is money, that is capital, inherently corrupting, but the acquisition of it can't be done honestly or fairly. The rich got rich by exploiting the worker.
Yes, that's true. All of this is true. That's literally how that works. That is how this works. Under a capitalist organization of the economy, the fear of starvation is what motivates you to work a job like this. And in that job, your boss, okay, the capital owner, will take your surplus labor value. You are always, by design, automatically going to be paid less than what you bring to the table. That is called profits. This is exactly how this works. This is exactly how exploitation works. You can make it seem as though it's totally different, but as long as you advocate for profits, that are not democratically assigned by the entire workforce, that like you are talking about like literally just taking people's surplus labor value and pocketing it for your shareholders, that in and of itself is theft in a Marxian sense. That in and of itself is exploitation in the Marxian sense, which is theft.
The rich got rich by exploiting the worker. For Marx, there's no other possible explanation. For many today, there is no other possible explanation.
That is quite literally how that works, okay? That is quite literally how that works. I don't know why you can say that that's not how that works. You just own it. The thing about capitalists is that they want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to both simultaneously uphold a system that is quite literally built around commodity production and the extraction of surplus labor value in the form of profits, and then and continuing to accumulate more and more wealth by doing so, and creating a system, designing a system that basically normalizes this, okay, and it has done it very successfully, and also forcing people into this kind of service, specifically with the threat of poverty at the other side if they do not become servile little little workers. Just own it. If you actually were to put a fucking name and association to like the human beings at the factory, at the widget factory in your econ textbooks, your entire perspective would be a lot different about micro and macroeconomic principles. That's it. The only difference, there's a very specific reason why they don't do that, because then you'd be like, well, what the fuck? That's actually pretty fucked up. Like, I don't understand. That doesn't seem great, actually. That like I am the fucking little worker at the widget factory that's gonna get laid off. And that is the reality, which is precisely why they try to mask it and turn around and be like, oh, well, it's not like that. These people wanted to do it. They wanted to fucking clean the toilets, and that they knew the boss was going to take some of their surplus labor value. Like, that's just Marx's analysis is just 100% fundamentally correct in that regard. It's just correct. The only difference is like He's not mixing words, I guess. His analysis of the extraction of surplus labor value is correct. You call it profits, and you think that that's a good thing. That's the main difference.
Philosophical justification for their anger, even their rage. From generation to generation, the formula never varies. Only by bringing the privileged down can the underprivileged be brought up. The venom that pours out of Marx's pen stems ultimately from the fact that reality wouldn't conform to his worldview. It never seems to have occurred to him that people are complex beings with different talents, ambitions, and desires.
Wait, what the fuck do you mean? He literally accounted for that by saying you should be able to, by way of collective action and potentially by bringing about like a socialist organization or allowing a socialist organization of the economy to occur, expand on your own personal desires that are unique to you. And focus on your talents, your ambitions, instead of being just a fucking dude that has to toil the land like a serf. You already admitted to that consideration earlier when you were talking about like, oh, they can actually do, people can do whatever the fuck they want to. Like, you personally admitted to that. This is such a weird fucking take because like, it's the same energy as like, well, poor people just chose to be poor. You know what I mean? It's always a choice. Yeah, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs is of course, famously about how, how everyone needs to be paid the same and about how everyone needs to do the same job. That's what that is. It's about like how human beings do not have the capacity or Marx's fundamental misunderstanding of human beings being unique. You know what I mean? That's what I took away from that, actually. Thank you.
If people wouldn't conform to his worldview voluntarily, then the state would just have to use other methods of persuasion, like murder and terror.
What? Violence is a part of every political system. Violence is, whether you like to admit it or not, regardless of how fucking humanitarian you are, just a fundamental role, plays a fundamental role in politics. As a matter of fact, politics is all about the distribution of resources and the distribution of violence, as in who gets to do the violent behavior and get away with it. The state, for example, can do violence all the time and does it all the time. There's different kinds of violence. There's the structural violence of poverty. There's systemic violence like the white supremacist systems that we've established. And then also there is the direct action of the direct state violence, like police bashing your fucking skull in. And finally, individual acts of violence. Obviously, I'm being as reductive as possible in the situation, but individual acts of violence would be like a person hitting another person. Sometimes justifiable, sometimes unjustifiable. But the attitude that people have towards violence is completely predicated upon who has the power, who has the political capital, and of course, under capitalism, who has the capital. When people talk about the inevitability of violence, they already are recognizing the existence of violence that they're subjected to upon the working class across the board under the bourgeois dictatorship that people exist under in capitalism, in the capitalist organization of the economy. If there's a turn away from that towards a different kind of system, then yes, there is going to be inevitable violence because the bourgeois will not give up their power willingly. This guy's a true leftist because he clearly hates reading books? Yeah. In 1987 survey, nearly half American survey believed the phrase "from each according to ability to each according to his need" came from the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. What is your political ideology? Do you think that capitalism a whole sucks or just the USA way of capitalism, no social backbone like in the EU? No, I think capitalism across the board, whether it is in the EU or just a global capitalist order, is just bad. It is bad for the overwhelming majority of people. It is bad for nearly every single person living in the third world. It is certainly less bad for people who are living in the imperial core, but still bad across the board. Even if they are part of the labor aristocracy, they still very much get owned into oblivion by the very same masters of capital that are running the entire operation. Then go to Russia. Yes, I should leave the United States of America to go to a country that is also run by oligarchs that were the nicest to our oligarchs at the time of the destruction of the USSR. That's the country I should go to. Another kleptocratic oligarch-run economy. Yeah, Russia, famously socialist. So when he says people are met with like violence or whatever when they're unable to change, he's not talking about the fucking working class. Even in the most like charitable interpretation of what the Prager guy is trying to fucking say, all I will simply state is this: if you are living under the oppressive thumb of a bourgeois capitalist-backed government that is subjecting you to untold amounts of violence, as it purposely has designed itself to ensure that you work meaningless jobs and toil away for the rest of your life like a good little servile pig. And anytime you try to fucking change that, it's considered, that's self-defense. That's the way to analyze it. Now, of course, there is no working class militancy in this country because capital has won and labor has lost. That's it. There is no working class militancy. There's no labor militancy in this country. There's no working class organizing in this country. Now, that can change. You're literally blaming free trade and economy. Fat Pig Jim. Hell yeah, I am. Yeah, totally.
What is astonishing is that millions came to believe him. What is
Oh
tragic
my god,
is...
hold on. I'm sorry. I'm grabbing another drink. I keep getting thirsty as shit. This place. Oh my god. Yes.
That millions more suffered and died
Yes.
because they did.
Let's go.
What is scary is that
All right.
millions continue to believe.
I love that, dude. Yeah, that's the scary part, dude. Murder. The murder and terror that is baked into and normalized in every facet of capitalist existence is completely overlooked in this subject matter. Obviously, that's just, they deserved it. They had it coming. That's right. Sorry, you shouldn't have been a fucking developing nation with robust natural resources. Have you thought about that, African nations? Have you thought about not being a fucking, not being a country that has minerals that we need?
God,
Sorry, we're gonna have to
so
do,
much
we're
easier.
gonna have to free trade your ass, and we're gonna have to free trade your ass super fucking hard. We're gonna do economic imperialism once we're done with the fucking
This is
colonial
so nice.
violence that we subjected you to. Sorry, that's just how it is. This is like the S tier Red Scare propaganda, Lamau. I mean, it's not though, because it's so stupid. Across the board, it's just not good. It's easily dismissible. Reading the comments. I love watching videos like this every so often so I can get a constant reminder how stupid capitalists are, especially Republicans, lol. Okay, that's one of you motherfuckers that wrote that. Thanks for the breakdown. Damn, this guy's devaluing his students' degrees with every word. Pathetic that peddling second-grade bullshit like this isn't grounds for termination. Regretfully, when C. Bradley Thompson was naming those who brought Marx to life, he left out three very important leaders: Benito Mussolini, Adolf Hitler, and Francisco Franco. Oh, and I almost forgot Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, George Soros, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, Nancy Pelosi, and a few more. Wait, hold on. Is he saying all those people are socialists? What? Communism failed to provide incentives for workers and citizens to work hard and be productive. While there are many benefits from
hold
equality, if pushed to an extreme, it robs people of an incentive to make an effort. Also, a big problem with communism is the enormous centralization of power, and if that power turns corrupt, is GG. Yeah, good luck. Good thing that here in capitalism, we don't have a centralization of power, and that centralization of power is not corrupt. Oh, wait, it actually is. There is a centralization of power, and it's completely fucking corrupt with no actual checks or balances. Not only that, but also we literally have normalized that corruption. The most beautiful part about Western capitalist agitprop that has created this fucking dogmatic attitude towards capitalism's existence that consistently needs to be re-upped, that consistently needs to be defended, is the notion that corporations are undemocratic by design. It is an authoritarian power structure. It's where you spend 80% of your fucking adult lives, and you don't even expect it to be fucking democratic. As a matter of fact, you push back against like even a semblance of power in the form of organizing in the workplace. And that's fucking so incredibly successful propaganda right there, dude. You literally, it's the same attitude as like, Eastern nations, the barbarians, the awful fucking corrupt Eastern nations, from an Orientalist lens, actually do bribery. What do we have here in the Western world? Well, we have lobbying. We have corporate lobbying. We have the revolving door. These are all completely understandable and completely normal things that a government could do. It's very different than bribery. Bribery is bad. Bribery is wrong and immoral, which I agree with, except when you codify it. Except when you basically make it legal in the form of lobbying. Remember that. The same shit. Corporations are designed quite literally in a way that is authoritarian, undemocratic. You can't fucking not go to work. You can barely not go to work if you're sick. Meanwhile, you're like defending that attitude because you have no fucking self-respect. You have nothing. Not only do you have no self-respect, but you have also lost the will to fight. And I don't blame you for it because you don't understand. You can't even see a world in which you have a mechanism to fight back against that structure. Okay, let's see. Understanding Marxism from each according to his ability. I love this guy.
In a remarkably short period of time, the philosophy of Karl Marx changed the course of history. At the height of its power, half the world fell under its dominion, kept there by a combination of fear, terror, and brute force.
The fear and terror that they subjected the Nazis to is fucking terrifying.
It imploded. By all rights, this should have been the end of Marxism, but it hasn't turned out that way.
Imploded, you know, with a little push all around the world, you know what I mean? All around the world, like in Latin American countries, it imploded when we, you know, used the American military to train death squads to murder revolutionary groups and actually train them how to rape nuns effectively. That's real, by the way. That was pretty cool when we did that. That was pretty tight. I mean, that's just a natural process, though, you know? It's real. Look it up. Look up the El Mozote massacre. That is, of course, when we weren't ripping through the country and stealing and extracting all their natural resources. Not even revolutionaries, non-revolutionary communists and socialists, too. Oh, yeah, of course. Even reformists got the fucking bullet. Okay, let's see what else he's got to say.
From environmentalism with its rejection of free markets to critical race theory, which sees white patriarchy as the source of all evil.
I love that, dude. Critical race theory, yeah. Dude, these are, you know, Marxism is teaching people that white patriarchy is the source of all evil, totally.
You'll find Marxism at its root. The leaders of Black Lives Matter, for example, openly acknowledge their devotion to Marxist ideology.
The Black Lives Matter people are like, it has to be a psyop, dude. I just don't. I can't. Everything that has come out of that organization, it just comes like, maybe I'm too brain diseased, but like the BLM, the international like BLM organization, it has to be a fucking psyop. Like, there's no fucking way, dude. There's no way. There's just no way. More likely a grift. Okay, well that too, but
we can find answers in one of Marx's most enduring epigrams. From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. Marx was a poor economist.
Imagine being a poor economist,
but a talented journalist.
Loser, dude.
The only actual job he ever had. He knew how to turn a phrase. But what does this slogan even mean?
He knew how to turn
according
a phrase.
to what ability? According to what need?
Marx was a poster and a slob. That is for sure. I mean, he's going back to like Marx's entire worldview is designed around his envy for the wealthy. Even though like his homie was pretty fucking wealthy.
I'm just gonna try it.
Literally had a factory and didn't seem. I don't know if he was like super envious of Engels. You know, he would either be the best or worst Twitter poster. No, he was fucking. Marx was disgusting. Like lived in filth, didn't take a shower, would be up for many hours throughout the day, and sometimes throughout the entire night. Would write for like hours and hours and hours and hours, and then sleep during the day. He was crusty as fuck. That's at least what the cops said when the police were spying on him. Don't get any fucking dumbass ideas. No, you are not like Karl Marx.
Stop.
You also don't shower.
And who determines anyone's ability?
Yo, his chat is so fucked.
Marx never bothered to answer these obvious questions. He had much bigger things
oh
on his
my
mind.
God.
Nothing less than the creation of an entirely new kind of world.
I like that. He's like, he's just basically fucking saying like, no, someone has to do that. Like someone. It can't be up to the individual. I thought you were a fucking individualist. Like, what's up? Yo, these fucking capitalists, like, they dropped the fucking pretext of, like, you know, hyping up the individual so quickly when you are seen as, like, when you have an opportunity to be like, well, what about when someone else, when someone is personally fucking deciding on that? You know what I mean? It's like, well, no, you can't do that. Someone has to do it. Someone has to make you work at gunpoint. Remember when the Chamber of Commerce was like looking for new ways to get people to go back to work when people were just not going back to work? And they were like, all right, we should just like literally, I don't know, force people back to work at gunpoint. I remember.
Marx believed that by altering man's economic and political institutions, he could alter, or even better, rewire the human brain. He could conjure a new consciousness that would replace the old false one. This new man would be less selfish and acquisitive and more altruistic and communal. In short, he would be a superior type of man.
But we do that already. That's what's going on under capitalism. He's not wrong. Yes, exactly. No, that's like the fact that the very notion that you think that this society is designed around greed, and the very notion that people personally fucking believe that they too are a temporarily embarrassed millionaire or billionaire rather than the abused, exploited proletariat is straight up because of that. You can talk about it like it's a fucking lobotomy or brain surgery, but yes, that is true. That is what's happening under capitalism.
Of course, this new man could only reach this goal if he wasn't preoccupied with having to earn money. According to Marx, money and the pursuit of it ruined everything. Marx hated money. Maybe because he never found a way to make it.
Wait, what?
Getting rid of it was central to his worldview.
Dude, everything revolves around like individual envy, dude. That's awesome. Yeah, no, he was just like, yo, I fucking hate money, dog. This content is dope. This is fucking fire.
One's daily bread was distributed on the basis of need rather than greed, man's natural communal affections, long suppressed by his capitalist overlords, would be renewed. This is Marx channeling the 18th century French social thinker Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of the few people Marx admired. According to Rousseau, this is what you must do if you want to create a new society. He who dares to undertake the making of a people's institutions must feel himself capable of changing human nature, of transforming each individual who by himself is a complete and solitary whole into part of a larger whole, from which the individual receives his life and his being. Understand this, and you understand not only a key feature of Marxist thought, but the dark history of the 20th century.
I mean, this isn't wrong. The current organization of the economy 100% guides all avenues of existence. Like all facets of our life is guided by the way that the society is designed to uplift and reinforce capitalist hegemonic attitudes. So yes, saying that a different organization of the economy is possible and would lead to many benefits, such as people having time to focus on themselves, people actually changing their attitude to focus more on community, that's not incorrect. And for a Republican, supposedly, or a person who is like supposedly fucking, American liberal, you know what I mean? To personally find this to be a bad take is so strange.
Marx took Rousseau literally. Human nature had to be returned to its allegedly pure, selfless state before capitalism, with its enlightenment and Judeo-Christian values.
Okay, first and foremost, human nature is a fucking idiotic argument regardless. It's a fallacy. Our entire existence is built upon overcoming nature, so that's really dumb. Secondly, before capitalism and its alignment of Judeo-Christian values, what the fuck do you mean? Even Judeo-Christian values predate fucking capitalism, okay? And we're not as such. This idea that like fucking Jesus Christ was a capitalist is a silly one. But also, primitive accumulation, primitive communism is a much longer period of mankind's existence where there was no such profit incentive. And that's simply what Marx is mentioning when he talks about like a different organization of economy is possible. And even if you were to claim that like nature plays a role in this, even from a natural perspective, we have lived as hunter-gatherers, and we have lived in primitive communist organizations for much, much longer than we have as a capitalist society.
But creating this new man would be a formidable task. Marx anticipated that many would object, especially the owners and managers.
Yeah, I wonder why. I wonder why they would fucking object. By the way, this is so funny, the way that they're like showing the owners and managers, like they're doing like unironic anti-capitalist agitprop by doing this. I think it's pretty funny to do so.
Friendly persuasion wasn't going to get the job done.
I mean, it's true. It hasn't, and it failed. And it's not like the fucking capital owners engage in friendly persuasion. Friendly persuasion is just icing on the fucking cake on top of many different methods of control. So what the fuck does he mean, friendly persuasion? It's not friendly persuasion when the police force is used to destroy fucking striking workers, okay? To fuck over the picket line. It's not friendly persuasion when Amazon changes the fucking red light outside of the Bessemer facility because they realized that like organizers were standing outside of that red light and actually were able to talk to the workers that are leaving the factory That's not friendly persuasion. Friendly persuasion isn't when, you know, Coca-Cola uses death squads to murder Colombian labor organizers. That's not friendly persuasion, motherfucker. What do you mean? Yeah, friendly persuasion is when healthcare is tied to your fucking job. One of the most interesting parts about, you know, being anti-capitalist in the United States of America is that, like, America is in the final stage of, like, capitalist exploitation, but also in the final stage of capitalist commodity fetishization as well. So in a weird way, it's harder to bring about like any kind of class solidarity amongst the working class because we're too consumed and we're too consumed with our own personal base desires that are being like functionally fulfilled. And, you know, food prices are stable across the board. So, like, those needs are somehow relatively met, and, like, the poor are pushed away, and you can actually use them as a fucking example of what will happen to you if you don't actually work super hard. But also, at the same time, there are so many aspects of our existence that is so inhumane and so fucking cruel that it does have a radicalizing effect. The way to recognize and to be able to radicalize people and do agitprop is also relatively easy in America because, like, I think in many ways it's like harder for people to recognize that they're being fucked over if they have some of their needs met. Because, like, social democracies have given, welfare states have given new breathing light into capitalist organizations of the economy. They've actually they've stopped the inevitable contradictions from playing itself in the way that it normally would, which is what makes it even harder. I'm not an accelerationist by any means or anything like that, but obviously that is part of the reason why it is really difficult to radicalize and push for even further change in countries like that.
Private property, wage labor, competition and profits, these would have to go. The state, now run by the workers themselves, the dictatorship of the proletariat, as Marx called it, would control production and pricing. It would wisely manage the economy.
Yeah, dude, totally. Because we don't have any sort of centralization right now under you know, the capitalist economy. There's no centralization. You know, subsidies, for example, or I don't know, any kind of like federal control, federal regulation that comes with no additional fucking scrutiny even. Like, for example, when a company knows full well that they'll get bailed out in times of need by the taxpayers so they can fucking engage in stock buybacks instead of, like, I don't know, and continue to eliminate redundancies because they know that, like, the government will fucking protect them no matter what happens. That sort of understanding is really cool. I love that. I love when capitalists are like, yeah, dude, you know, it's wonderful that we have a totally capitalist economic organization with no centralized control. The only difference right now is that, like, you're paying for it, you're actually working in the fucking fields, and then your surplus labor value is being taken from you, and then those people are fucking literally feeding back into the machine to ensure that there is more corporate welfare and that you can't get any of that because that would be considered a moral hazard, okay? And then those very same capitalists that are taking your surplus labor value are able to design the system in a way that suits them, and suits their needs, and they do personally benefit from a centralized economy.
From each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And imagine how wonderful it would be. No more ego, no more self-interest. Instead, everybody working for the benefit of everybody else. Peace, love, and harmony. For many, it's a very seductive idea. Who wouldn't aspire to live in such a world? Look around, a Marxist might say. The powerful exploit the weak, crushing the majority's noble aspirations, your aspirations, just so they can have more. It's unfair and unjust. How much better if we just start over, start clean? That's the Marxist socialist dream.
Wait, this doesn't sound bad. What's going on?
In real life, it's a nightmare.
Oh,
never
mind. I love that he was like, all the things that could be good, actually, well, they're bad. You know what I mean? He was like, yeah. Hey, you want all those good things? Well, guess what, dude? All those good things would actually be bad. And then, like, fucking guitar, like a guitar riff in the background. Ha! Got you, dude. You fucking got no response, bitch. I'm a capitalist now.
Become demands, and demands become rights. The best are mocked, and the worst exalted. Innovation withers, while the government grows ever larger. Eventually, the productive become virtual slaves to the unproductive. and the society collapses economically, intellectually, and morally.
The productive become the unproductive, dude. The productive become virtual slaves to the unproductive. Yeah. Under a socialist order of the economy, we are going to take the fucking business owners and subjugate them. We are going to ensure that these capitalist pig dogs living up atop their ivory mountaintops. I'm fucking up. I don't know what I would say there. Whatever. And there we're going to turn them into servile dogs for our desires. Their
and
ivory
the society
towers.
collapses economically, intellectually, and morally. And then the real horror starts. If you think I'm exaggerating, just ask someone who fled the Soviet Union or Cuba or Venezuela.
Dude, oh, come on, dude. We gotta run that. Even Farad is chiming in from the background. He said Venezuela before he said it. Here, this.
Here is the actual distribution
He did this, dude. This video is just this.
Poorest Americans don't even register. They're down to pocket change.
Venezuela.
Jesus.
Start a small business instead. That's true. This is literally fucking true, dude. I love that because like that video so succinctly it describes exactly what this fucking nerd is trying to explain. You know what I mean? Understanding Marxism changed the world. Okay, this one is gonna be good.
Engraved on Karl Marx's tombstone in Highgate Cemetery in North London are the following words. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Substitute the word professor for the word philosopher. We really don't have philosophers anymore, and you get right to the core of Marx's enduring attraction to the contemporary world. Marx demands that the intellectual class, the professors of law, sociology, history, women's studies, anthropology, journalism, and so on, come out of the ivory tower and join the barricades, to see themselves not as the preservers of the dusty past, but the creators of a new and glorious future. The lure has proven to be very strong, and it's not hard to understand why. How much more meaningful, exciting, and romantic to see yourself as an agent of change rather than a mere academic. How much more meaningful, exciting, and romantic to see the young people who fill up your classroom as potential soldiers in the cause. Send them into the world with the same revolutionary spirit, the same disgust toward bourgeois middle-class values that you feel, and you've done your job. And we must give these lecture hall revolutionaries their due. Look around.
It's always so funny because it's like, dude, you're a college professor. Like, what the fuck do you mean? It's only good if you're a college professor that's like upholding the very same systems. You know what I mean? You're literally a college professor at Clemson, dog. What the fuck are you talking about? He's like, yeah, but it's okay. It's okay when I am using my position as an educator to like misguide you. I love doing that. But also in the opposite direction at a fucking fake university that's not a real university that is actually only alive as a consequence of oil barons funding it, okay? Not for any other reason, but like oil barons are giving me money currently so I can just fucking lie to people. That's the appropriate way to do it.
This movement, environmentalism, critical race theory, the massive expansion of the welfare state. Not to mention diversity, equity, and inclusion offices at every university and major corporation, and you will find Marxism at its core. A contempt of the Enlightenment and the Judeo-Christian value system from which capitalism springs. Marx's most famous call to action, workers of the world unite, was not, of course, to the professoriate, but to the laboring class. That didn't work out so well.
By the way, like, I know that people people get annoyed with like fucking PhDs and shit, but like, I mean, you're still an exploited worker as a PhD by these like neoliberal institutions that are like ass fucking you. You know what I mean? So I don't know why there's this attitude there. It's like, for a guy who supposedly knows a lot about Marx, it's kind of weird that like he's just automatically like, no, if you're an educator, actually you're literally not an educator or a researcher, sometimes both, right? As a PhD, you're not a worker. You're just not. You're an elitist. So have fun getting paid literally nothing.
Workers, especially in the United States, turned out to be more interested in refrigerators than revolutions. The only barricade they were passionate about was a white picket fence in front of a green suburban lawn. Poor, benighted souls, the appeal of Marxism was somehow lost on them, maybe because they didn't go to college. But the intellectual class...
No, it actually has nothing to do with college and everything to do with like the purposeful dismantling of labor organizing and labor unions as the American bourgeois capitalist government has completely robbed the working class of any fucking spark of action, any hope for change. That's it. Labor aristocracy equals global proletariat. I mean, even the labor aristocracy is fucked over in the United States of America.
Even after Stalin, even after Mao, even after Castro wrecked Cuba, even after Pol Pot murdered millions of his fellow Cambodians, even after Hugo Chavez destroyed the strongest economy in South America, the academic elite...
Yeah, famously, dude, Chavez totally destroyed it. I love, like, doing multiple coup attempts and like basically a successful, well, technically unsuccessful business plot on a country with like robust natural resources that are like literally a necessity for, you know, the current global economy's survival, and then dismantling it by one, sanctioning everything, okay, for the crime of nationalization, a liberty afforded only to countries like Norway. That he really fucking destroyed it, dude. Chavez really fucked it all up, huh? It's so bad. Was literally Venezuela was the strongest economy in South America. I mean, it was under Chavez's reign as well, until, you know, the numerous attempts internally, backed by the CIA and the American State Department, got enough of the especially the food production industry to support any fucking attempt of diversifying their economy. That paired up with sanctions destroyed their economy.
Indeed, in a world without faith, where God is dead, Marxism has become, in effect, a substitute religion.
As opposed to the good religion, the Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah.
The capitalist Judeo-Christian values that I am telling you.
In our secular world, the Marxist ideal gives the Marxist true believer a reason to live, a reason to die, and a reason to kill. Monsters like Lenin, Stalin, Mao, Kim Il-sung, Ho Chi Minh, and Pol Pot.
Monsters like a Ho Chi Minh. He said monsters like Lenin. Monsters like a Ho Chi Minh. Also Pol Pot, like, you know, kind of aligned with Henry Kissinger more than anything else. You know what I mean?
For the record, the latter two were politically educated in France. Pol Pot studied at the Sorbonne.
Wait, what the fuck? Like, virtually all of these leaders have fucking studied in Western institutions. What the fuck?
But your new democratic socialism will get it right. Think again. Marxism leads a society toward a fixed goal, a utopian vision of pure freedom in which the individual is liberated from the false consciousness of capitalism. Unfortunately, by Marx's own definition, the path to this utopia requires the destruction, economically, politically, and morally, of every vestige of civilization as we know it. Economically, Marxism seeks to destroy free enterprise, the division of labor, profit and loss,
Why would Marxism seek to destroy the division of labor? Sure, okay, maybe free enterprise, but like, why would... I mean, I don't know what he means by all of this, okay? But profit and loss, like, what? So how do you destroy loss? Let's say you destroyed profit, but how do you destroy loss?
Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. This file is being recorded for the May 2021 edition of Socialism for All, and it's an audiobook of The State and Revolution by V.I. Lenin. If you like this video, please click like and subscribe, and consider supporting us on Patreon. There's a link to Patreon in the video description. So, this is an audiobook of The State and Revolution, the Marxist Theory of the State, and the Tasks of the Proletariat in the Revolution by V.I. Lenin. It was originally written from August to September 1917. The source is Collected Works, Volume 25. First published in 1918. HTML transcription by Zodiac and Brian Baggins. The online version is from the Lenin Internet Archive at Marxists.org, 1993-1999. And thanks as usual to Marxists.org, the Marxists Internet Archive, for hosting this file and thousands of other free Marxist texts. Please go check them out. So the only note before we get into the text itself from Socialism for All is that this is the 7th entry in the Marxism-Leninism Basic Study Plan curriculum from the Anti-Imperialism Movement, or Movimiento Antiimperialista, MAI. We have a playlist going on the channel. If you go to the playlists tab on the channel, you will find that playlist and many others of videos that we have put together on socialism. The preceding entry in this playlist is Lenin's What Is to Be Done. The next entry that we'll be putting up from this playlist is Lenin's The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky, coming soon to the channel. Okay, that's the end of notes from S4A, so let's get into the text. The text starts with a note from the Lenin Internet Archive. Lenin wrote The State and Revolution in August and September 1917, when he was in hiding from persecution of the provisional government. The need for such a theoretical work as this was mentioned by Lenin in the second half of 1916. It was then that he wrote his note on the Youth International, in which he criticized Bukharin's position on the question of the state and promised to write a detailed article on what he thought to be the Marxist attitude to the state. In a letter to A.M. Kollontai on February 17, 1917, he said that he had almost got ready material on that question. This material was written in a small blue-covered notebook headed Marxism on the State. In it, Lenin had collected quotations from the works of Marx and Engels and extracts from the books by Kautsky, Pannekoek, and Bernstein with his own critical notes, conclusions, and generalizations. When Lenin left Switzerland for Russia in April 1917, he feared arrest by the provisional government and left the manuscript of Marxism on the State behind, as it would have been destroyed had he been caught. When in hiding after the July events, Lenin wrote in a note, quote, "Entre nous, if I am knocked off, I ask you to publish my notebook, Marxism on the State. It got held up in Stockholm. It is bound in a blue cover. All the quotations from Marx and Engels are collected there, also those from Kautsky against Pannekoek. There are a number of remarks, notes, and formulas. I think a week's work would be enough to publish it. I consider it important because not only Plekhanov, but Kautsky too, is confused." Unquote. When Lenin received his notebook from Stockholm, he used the material he had collected as a basis for his book, The State and Revolution. According to Lenin's plan, The State and Revolution was to have consisted of 7 chapters, but he did not write the 7th, the experience of the Russian revolutions of 1905 and 1917, and only a detailed plan has remained. In a note to the publisher, Lenin wrote that if he, quote, was too slow in completing this, the 7th chapter, or should it turn out to be too bulky, the first 6 chapters should be published separately as Book 1. Originally, the name F.F. Ivanovsky is shown on the first page of the notebook manuscript as that of the author. Lenin intended to publish the book under that pseudonym, otherwise the provisional government would have confiscated it for his name alone. The book, however, was not printed until 1918, when there was no longer any need for the pseudonym. The second edition appeared in 1919. In this revision, Lenin added to Chapter 2 a new section, the presentation of the question by Marx in 1852. That's the end of that section. Just to comment quickly on the timeline here. So, of course, the October Revolution in 1917 is when the Bolsheviks took power. That's why Lenin no longer needed to use a pseudonym, and the provisional government from which he was hiding was the government that was established by the Russian bourgeoisie after the Tsar was deposed in the February Revolution in 1917. So it was during this eventful year that Lenin wrote this work, and, well, quite a lot happened. Okay, on to the preface to the first edition. The question of the state is now acquiring particular importance, both in theory and in practical politics. The imperialist war has immensely accelerated and intensified the process of transformation of monopoly capitalism into state monopoly capitalism. The monstrous oppression of the working people by the state, which is merging more and more with the all-powerful capitalist associations, is becoming increasingly monstrous. The advanced countries, we mean their hinterland, are becoming military convict prisons for the workers. The unprecedented horrors and miseries of the protracted war are making the people's position unbearable and increasing their anger. The world proletarian revolution is clearly maturing. The question of its relation to the state is acquiring practical importance. The elements of opportunism that accumulated over the decades of comparatively peaceful development have given rise to the trend of social chauvinism, which dominated the official socialist parties throughout the world. This trend, socialism in words and chauvinism in deeds, Plekhanov, Patrusov, Breshkovskaya, Rubanovich, and in a slightly veiled form, Tseretelli, Chernov and Co. in Russia, Scheiderman, Lejeune, David, and others in Germany, Renaudel, Gesta, and Vandervelde in France and Belgium, Hindman and the Fabians in England, etc., etc., is conspicuous for the base, servile adaptation of the, quote, leaders of socialism to the interests not only of their national bourgeoisie, but of their state, for the majority of the so-called great powers have long been exploiting and enslaving a whole number of small and weak nations. And the imperialist war is a war for the division and redivision of this kind of booty. The struggle to free the working people from the influence of the bourgeoisie in general, and of the imperialist bourgeoisie in particular, is impossible without a struggle against opportunist prejudices concerning the state. First of all, we examine the theory of Marx and Engels of the state, and dwell in particular detail on those aspects of this theory which are ignored or have been distorted by the opportunists. Then we deal specially with the one who is chiefly responsible for these distortions, Karl Kautsky, the best-known leader of the Second International, 1889 to 1914, which has met with such miserable bankruptcy in the present war. Lastly, we sum up the main results of the experience of the Russian revolutions of 1905 and particularly of 1917. Apparently, the latter is now, early August 1917, completing the first stage of its development, but this revolution as a whole can only be understood as a link in a chain of socialist proletarian revolutions being caused by the imperialist war. The question of the relation of the socialist proletarian revolution to the state, therefore, is acquiring not only practical political importance, but also the significance of a most urgent problem of the day, the problem of explaining to the masses what they will have to do before long to free themselves from capitalist tyranny. The author, August 1917. That's the end of the preface to the first edition, now beginning the preface to the second edition. The present second edition is published virtually unaltered, except that Section 3 has been added to Chapter 2. Signed, the author, Moscow, December 17, 1918. And that's the end of that preface. Moving on now to Chapter 1, Class, Society, and the State. Section 1. The State, a product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. What is now happening to Marx's theory has, in the course of history, happened repeatedly to the theories of revolutionary thinkers and leaders of oppressed classes fighting for emancipation. During the lifetime of great revolutionaries, the oppressing classes constantly hounded them, received their theories with the most savage malice, the most furious hatred, and the most unscrupulous campaigns of lies and slander. After their death, attempts are made to convert them into harmless icons, to canonize them, so to say, and to hallow their names, to a certain extent, for the consolation of the oppressed classes and with the object of duping the latter, while at the same time robbing the revolutionary theory of its substance, blunting its revolutionary edge and vulgarizing it. Today, the bourgeoisie and the opportunists within the labor movement concur in this doctoring of Marxism. They omit, obscure, or distort the revolutionary side of this theory, its revolutionary soul. They push to the foreground and extol what is or seems acceptable to the bourgeoisie. All the social chauvinists are now, quote, Marxists, don't laugh. And more frequently, German bourgeois scholars, only yesterday specialists in the annihilation of Marxism, are speaking of the, quote, national German Marx, who they claim educated the labor unions, which are so splendidly organized for the purpose of waging a predatory war. In these circumstances, in view of the unprecedentedly widespread distortion of Marxism, our prime task is to reestablish what Marx really taught on the subject of the state. This will necessitate a number of long quotations from the works of Marx and Engels themselves. Of course, long quotations will render the text cumbersome and not help at all to make it popular reading, but we cannot possibly dispense with them. All, or at any rate, all the most essential passages in the works of Marx and Engels on the subject of the state must by all means be quoted as fully as possible, so that the reader may form an independent opinion of the totality of the views of the founders of scientific socialism, and of the evolution of those views, and so that their distortion by the Kautskyism now prevailing may be documentarily proved and clearly demonstrated. Let us begin with the most popular of Engels' works, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State, the 6th edition of which was published in Stuttgart as far back as 1894. We have to translate the quotations from the German originals, as the Russian translations, while very numerous, are for the most part either incomplete or very unsatisfactory. Summing up his historical analysis, Engels says, quote, "The state is, therefore, by no means a power forced on society from without. Just as little is it the reality of the ethical idea, the image and reality of reason, as Hegel maintains. Rather, it is a product of society at a certain stage of development. It is the admission that this society has become entangled in an insoluble contradiction with itself, that it is split into irreconcilable antagonisms which it is powerless to dispel. But in order that these antagonisms, these classes with conflicting economic interests, might not consume themselves and society in fruitless struggle, it became necessary to have a power seemingly standing above society that would alleviate the conflict and keep it within the bounds of order. And this power, arisen out of society but placing itself above it and alienating itself more and more from it, is the state." Unquote. This expresses with perfect clarity the basic idea of Marxism with regard to the historical role and the meaning of the state. The state is a product and a manifestation of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms. The state arises where, when, and insofar as class antagonism objectively cannot be reconciled. And conversely, the existence of the state proves that the class antagonisms are irreconcilable. It is on this most important and fundamental point that the distortion of Marxism, proceeding along two main lines, begins. On the one hand, the bourgeois, and particularly the petty bourgeois, ideologists, compelled under the weight of indisputable historical facts to admit that the state only exists where there are class antagonisms and a class struggle.
Let's go.
Quote, correct Marx in such a way as to make it appear that the state is an organ for the reconciliation of classes. According to Marx, the state could neither have arisen nor maintained itself had it been possible to reconcile classes. From what the petty bourgeois and Philistine professors and publicists say, with quite frequent and benevolent references to Marx, it appears that the state does reconcile classes. According to Marx, the state is an organ of class rule, an organ for the oppression of one class by another. It is the creation of, quote, order, which legalizes and perpetuates this oppression by moderating the conflict between classes. In the opinion of the petty bourgeois politicians, however, order means the reconciliation of classes, and not the oppression of one class by another. To alleviate the conflict means reconciling classes and not depriving the oppressed classes of definite means and methods of struggle to overthrow their oppressors. For instance, when, in the Revolution of 1917, the question of the significance and role of the state arose in all its magnitude as a practical question demanding immediate action, and, moreover, action on a mass scale, all the social revolutionaries and Mensheviks descended at once to the petty bourgeois theory that the, quote, state, quote, reconciles classes. Comment, social revolutionaries and Mensheviks are basically what we would call radlibs and sockdems today. Continuing, innumerable resolutions and articles by politicians of both these parties are thoroughly saturated with this petty bourgeois and Philistine reconciliation theory, that the state is an organ of the rule of a definite class which cannot be reconciled with its antipode, the class opposite to it, is something the petty bourgeois Democrats will never be able to understand. Their attitude to the state is one of the most striking manifestations of the fact that our socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks are not socialists at all, a point that we Bolsheviks have always maintained, but petty bourgeois Democrats using near-socialist phraseology. Comment, that's exactly, so what I always say radlibs are liberals using radical language. That's exactly it right there. Continuing. On the other hand, the Kautskyite distortion of Marxism is far more subtle. Quote, theoretically, it is not denied that the state is an organ of class rule, or that class antagonisms are irreconcilable. But what is overlooked or glossed over is this. If the state is the product of the irreconcilability of class antagonisms, if it is a power standing above society and, quote, alienating itself more and more from it, it is clear that the liberation of the oppressed class is impossible not only without a violent revolution, but also without the destruction of the apparatus of state power, which was created by the ruling class, and which is the embodiment of this, quote, alienation. As we shall see later, Marx very explicitly drew this theoretically self-evident conclusion on the strength of a concrete historical analysis of the tasks of the revolution. And, as we shall show in detail further on, it is this conclusion which Kautsky has, quote, forgotten and distorted. Section 2. Special bodies of armed men, prisons, etc. Engels continues, quote, as distinct from the old Gentile, tribal or clan order, the state first divides its subjects according to territory, unquote. This division seems natural to us, but it costs a prolonged struggle against the old organization, according to generations or tribes. Quote, the second distinguishing feature is the establishment of a public power, which no longer directly coincides with the population organizing itself as an armed force. This special public power is necessary because a self-acting armed organization of the population has become impossible since the split into classes. This public power exists in every state. It consists not merely of armed men, but also of material adjuncts, prisons, and institutions of coercion of all kinds, of which Gentile, clan society knew nothing, unquote. Engels elucidates the concept of the power which is called the state, a power which arose from society but places itself above it and alienates itself more and more from it. What does this power mainly consist of? It consists of special bodies of armed men having prisons, etc. at their command. We are justified in speaking of special bodies of armed men because the public power, which is an attribute of every state, quote, does not directly coincide with the armed population, with its, quote, self-acting armed organization.
Yikes.
Like all great revolutionary thinkers, Engels tries to draw the attention of the class-conscious workers
could
to what prevailing
genuinely
Philistinism
put everything
regards
in
as
here.
least worthy of attention, as the most habitual thing, hallowed by prejudices that are not only deep-rooted, but, one might say, petrified. A standing army and police are the chief instruments of state power. But how can it be otherwise? From the viewpoint of the vast majority of Europeans at the end of the 19th century, whom Engels was addressing, and who had not gone through or closely observed a single great revolution, it could not have been otherwise. They could not understand at all what a, quote, self-acting armed organization of the population was. When asked why it became necessary to have special bodies of armed men placed above society and alienating themselves from it, police and a standing army, the West European and Russian Philistines are inclined to utter a few phrases borrowed from Spencer of Mikhailovsky to refer to the growing complexity of social life, the differentiation of functions, and so on. Such a reference seems scientific and effectively lulls the ordinary person to sleep by obscuring the important and basic fact, namely the split of society into irreconcilable antagonistic classes. Were it not for this split, the, quote, self-acting armed organization of the population would differ from the primitive organization of a stick-wielding herd of monkeys, or of primitive men, or of men united in clans by its complexity, its high technical level, and so on. But such an organization would still be possible. It is impossible because civilized society is split into antagonistic and, moreover, irreconcilably antagonistic classes whose self-acting arming would lead to an armed struggle between them. A state arises, a special power is created, special bodies of armed men, and every revolution, by destroying the state apparatus, shows us the naked class struggle, clearly shows us how the ruling class strives to restore the special bodies of armed men which serve it, and how the oppressed class strives to create a new organization of this kind, capable of serving the exploited instead of the exploiters. In the above argument, Engels raises theoretically the very same question which every great revolution raises before us in practice, palpably, and, what is more, on a scale of mass action, namely, the question of the relationship between special bodies of armed men and the self-acting armed organization of the population. We shall see how this question is specifically illustrated by the experience of the European and Russian revolutions. But to return to Engels' exposition, he points out that sometimes, in certain parts of North America, for example, this public power is weak. He has in mind a rare exception in capitalist society, and those parts of North America in its pre-imperialist days where the free colonists predominated, but that, generally speaking, it grows stronger. Quote, it, the public power, grows stronger, however, in proportion as class antagonisms within the state become more acute, and as adjacent states become larger and more populous. We have only to look at our present-day Europe, where class struggle and rivalry in conquest have tuned up the public power to such a pitch that it threatens to swallow the whole of society and even the state, unquote. This was written not later than the early 90s of the last century, Engels' last preface being dated June 16, 1891. The turn toward imperialism, meaning the complete domination of the trusts, the omnipotence of the big banks, a grand-scale colonial policy, and so forth, was only just beginning in France, and was even weaker in North America and in Germany. Since then, rivalry in conquest has taken a gigantic stride, all the more because by the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century, the world had been completely divided up among these rivals in conquest, i.e., among the predatory great powers. Since then, military and naval armaments have grown fantastically, and the predatory war of 1914 to 17 for the domination of the world by Britain or Germany, for the division of the spoils, has brought the swallowing of all forces of society by the rapacious state power close to complete catastrophe. Engels could, as early as 1891, point to rivalry in conquest as one of the most important distinguishing features of the foreign policy of the great powers, while the social chauvinist scoundrels have, ever since 1914, when this rivalry, many times intensified, gave rise to an imperialist war, been covering up the defense of the predatory interests of, quote, their own bourgeoisie, with phrases about, quote, defense of the fatherland, defense of the republic and the revolution, etc. Section 3. The state, an instrument for the exploitation of the oppressed class. The maintenance of the special public power standing above society requires taxes and state loans. Quote, having public power and the right to levy taxes, Engels writes, the officials now stand as organs of society above society. The free, voluntary respect that was accorded to the organs of the Gentile clan constitution does not satisfy them, even if they could gain it. Special laws are enacted proclaiming the sanctity and immunity of the officials. The shabbiest police servant has more authority than the representative of the clan, but even the head of the military power of a civilized state may well envy the elder of a clan the unrestrained respect of society, unquote. The question of the privileged position of the officials as organs of state power is raised here. The main point indicated is, what is it that places them above society? We shall see how this theoretical question was answered in practice by the Paris Commune in 1871, and how it was obscured from a reactionary standpoint by Kautsky in 1912. Quote, because the state arose from the need to hold class antagonisms in check, but because it arose at the same time in the midst of the conflict of these classes, it is, as a rule, the state of the most powerful, economically dominant class, which, through the medium of the state, becomes also the politically dominant class, and thus acquires new means of holding down and exploiting the oppressed class. The ancient and feudal states were organs for the exploitations of the slaves and serfs. Likewise, the modern representative state is an instrument of exploitation of wage labor by capital. By way of exception, however, periods occur in which the warring classes balance each other so nearly that the state power as ostensible mediator acquires for the moment a certain degree of independence of both. Such were the absolute monarchies of the 17th and 18th centuries, the Bonapartism of the First and Second Empires in France, and the Bismarck regime in Germany, unquote. Such, we may add, is the Kerensky government in Republican Russia, since it began to persecute the revolutionary proletariat at a moment when, owing to the leadership of the petty bourgeois Democrats, the Soviets have already become impotent, while the bourgeoisie are not yet strong enough simply to disperse them. In a democratic republic, Engels continues, quote, wealth exercises its power indirectly, but all the more surely. First, by means of the, quote, direct corruption of officials, America. Secondly, by means of an, quote, alliance of the government and the stock exchange, France and America. At present, imperialism and the domination of the banks have, quote, developed into an exceptional art, both these methods of upholding and giving effect to the omnipotence of wealth in democratic republics of all descriptions. Since, for instance, in the very first months of the Russian Democratic Republic, one might say during the honeymoon of the socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, joined in wedlock to the bourgeoisie in the coalition government. Quick comment, if you'd like to know more about this, I recently, in April 2021, posted a series of 3 texts by Lenin concerning basically the events of the 2 revolutions, the February Revolution and the October Revolution in 1917. Their titles are War and Revolution, Lessons of the Revolution, and The Crisis Has Matured. There's also a Stalin text, October Revolution and the Tactics of the Russian Communists, posted soon thereafter. And in these texts, you can get a pretty good idea of the treachery of the Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries, who basically, although those 2 groups, not the Bolsheviks, dominated the Soviets, they refused in a revolutionary moment to take power, instead basically just joining with the bourgeoisie. Continuing. Mr. Palczynski obstructed every measure intended for curbing the capitalists and their marauding practices, their plundering of the state by means of war contracts, and since later on Mr. Palczynski, upon resigning from the cabinet and being, of course, replaced by another quite similar Palczynski, was rewarded by the capitalists with a lucrative job with a salary of 120,000 rubles per annum. What would you call that? Direct or indirect bribery? An alliance of the government and the syndicates, or merely friendly relations? What role do the Chernovs, Tseretellis, Avksentyevs, and Skobalevs play? Are they the direct or only the indirect allies of the millionaire treasury looters? Another reason why the omnipotence of wealth is more certain in a democratic republic is that it does not depend on defects in the political machinery or on the faulty political shell of capitalism. A democratic republic is the best possible shell for capitalism, and therefore, once capital has gained possession of this very best shell, through the Palczynskis, Chernovs, Tseretellis, and co., it establishes its power so securely, so firmly, that no change of persons, institutions, or parties in the bourgeois democratic republic can shake it. Comment sound familiar? We must also note that Engels is most explicit in calling universal suffrage as well an instrument of bourgeois rule. Universal suffrage, he says, obviously taking account of the long experience of German social democracy, is, quote, the gauge of the maturity of the working class. It cannot and never will be anything more in the present-day state, unquote. The petty bourgeois Democrats, such as our socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks, and also their twin brothers, all the social chauvinists and opportunists of Western Europe, expect just this more from universal suffrage. They themselves share and instill into the minds of the people the false notion that universal suffrage in the present-day state is really capable of revealing the will of the majority of the working people and of securing its realization. Here, we can only indicate this false notion, only point out that Engels' perfectly clear statement is distorted at every step in the propaganda and agitation of the official, i.e. opportunist, socialist parties. A detailed exposure of the utter falsity of this notion, which Engels brushes aside here, is given in our further account of the views of Marx and Engels on the present-day state. Engels gives a general summary of his views in the most popular of his works in the following words, quote, "The state, then, has not existed from all eternity. There have been some societies that did without it, that had no idea of the state and state power. At a certain stage of economic development, which was necessarily bound up with the split of society into classes, the state became a necessity owing to this split. We are now rapidly approaching a stage in the development of production at which the existence of these classes not only will have ceased to be a necessity, but will become a positive hindrance to production. They will fall as they rose at an earlier stage. Along with them, the state will inevitably fall. Society, which will reorganize production on the basis of a free and equal association of the producers, will put the whole machinery of the state where it will then belong, into a museum of antiquities, by the side of the spinning wheel and the bronze axe." Unquote. We do not often come across this passage in the propaganda and agitation literature of the present-day Social Democrats. Even when we do come across it, it is mostly quoted in the same manner as one bows before an icon, i.e., it is done to show official respect for Engels, but no attempt is made to gauge the breadth and depth of the revolution that this relegating of, quote, the whole machinery of state to a museum of antiquities implies. In most cases, we do not even find an understanding of what Engels calls the state machine. Section 4. The withering away of the state and violent revolution. Engels' words regarding the, quote, withering away of the state are so widely known they are often quoted, and so clearly reveal the essence of the customary adaptation of Marxism to opportunism that we must deal with them in detail. We shall quote the whole argument from which they are taken. Quote, The proletariat seizes from state power and turns the means of production into state property to begin with. But thereby it abolishes itself as the proletariat, abolishes all class distinctions and class antagonisms, and abolishes also the state as state. Society thus far, operating amid class antagonisms, needed the state, that is, an organization of the particular exploiting class, for the maintenance of its external conditions of production, and therefore especially for the purpose of forcibly keeping the exploited class in the conditions of oppression determined by the given mode of production: slavery, serfdom or bondage, wage labor. The state was the official representative of society as a whole, its concentration in a visible corporation. But it was this only insofar as it was the state of that class which itself represented, for its own time, society as a whole. In ancient times, the state of slave-owning citizens. In the Middle Ages, of the feudal nobility. In our own time, of the bourgeoisie. When at last it becomes the real representative of the whole of society, it renders itself unnecessary. As soon as there is no longer any social class to be held in subjection, as soon as class rule and the individual struggle for existence based upon the present anarchy in production, with the collisions and excesses arising from this struggle, are removed, nothing more remains to be held in subjection, nothing necessitating a special coercive force, a state. The first act by which the state really comes forward as the representative of the whole of society, the taking possession of the means of production in the name of society, is also its last independent act as a state. State interference in social relations becomes, in one domain after another, superfluous, and then dies down of itself. The government of persons is replaced by the administration of things, and by the conduct of processes of production. The state is not abolished, it withers away. This gives the measure of the value of the phrase "a free people's state," both to its justifiable use for a long time from an agitational point of view, and as to its ultimate scientific insufficiency, and also of the so-called anarchists' demand that the state be abolished overnight. Unquote. That was quoting from Anti-Düring. It is safe to say that of this argument of Engels, which is so remarkably rich in ideas, only one point has become
Oh
an
my
integral
God.
part of socialist thought
They're
among
starting
modern
here,
socialist
too.
parties, namely that, according to Marx, the state withers away, as distinct from the anarchist doctrine of the abolition of the state. To prune Marxism to such an extent means reducing it to opportunism, for this interpretation only leaves a vague notion of a slow, even gradual change, of absence of leaps and storms, of absence of revolution. The current, widespread, popular, if one may say so, conception of the withering away of the state undoubtedly means obscuring, if not repudiating, revolution. Such an interpretation, however, is the crudest distortion of Marxism, advantageous only to the bourgeoisie. In point of theory, it is based on disregard for the most important circumstances and considerations indicated in, say, Engels' summary argument we have just quoted in full. In the first place, at the very outset of his argument, Engels says that, in seizing state power, the proletariat thereby abolishes the state as state.
Oh, shit.
It is not done to ponder over the meaning of this. Generally, it is either
this is so
ignored
cool.
altogether or is considered to be something in the
Okay.
nature of,
Wait,
quote,
this isn't even-
Hegelian weakness on Engels' part. As a matter of fact, however, these words briefly express the
Am I in the
experience of
town
one of
hall?
the greatest proletarian revolutions,
Oh, yeah.
the Paris Commune of 1871, of which we shall speak in greater detail in its proper place. As a matter of fact, Engels speaks here of the proletarian revolution abolishing the bourgeois state, while the words about the state withering away refer to the remnants of the proletarian
Oh, no,
state
is this the
after
workshop?
the socialist revolution. According to Engels, the bourgeois state does not wither away, but is abolished by the proletariat in the course of the revolution. What withers away after this revolution is the proletarian state or semi-state. Secondly, the state is a special coercive force. Engels gives this splendid and extremely profound definition here with the utmost lucidity, and from it follows that the special coercive force for the suppression of the proletariat by the bourgeoisie, of millions of working people by handfuls of the rich, must be replaced by a special coercive force for the suppression of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat, the dictatorship of the proletariat. This is precisely what is meant by abolition of the state as state. This is precisely the act of taking possession of the means of production in the name of society. And it is self-evident that such a replacement of one bourgeois special force by another proletarian special force cannot possibly take place in the form of withering away. Thirdly, in speaking of the state withering away, and the even more graphic and colorful dying down of itself, Engels refers quite clearly and definitely to the period after the state has taken possession of the means of production in the name of the whole of society. That is, after the Socialist Revolution. We all know that the political form of the state at that time is the most complete democracy, but it never enters the head of any of the opportunists who shamelessly distort Marxism, that Engels is consequently speaking here of democracy dying down of itself, or withering away. This seems very strange at first sight, but it is incomprehensible only to those who have not thought about democracy also being a state and consequently also disappearing when the state disappears. Revolution alone can abolish the bourgeois state. The state in general, i.e. the most complete democracy, can only wither away. Fourthly, after formulating his famous proposition that the state withers away, Engels at once explains specifically that this proposition is directed against both the opportunists and the anarchists. In doing this, Engels puts in the forefront that conclusion drawn from the proposition that the state withers away, which is directed against the opportunists. One can wager that out of every 10,000 persons who have read or heard about the withering away of the state, 9,990 are completely unaware or do not remember that Engels directed his conclusions from that proposition not against anarchists alone, and of the remaining 10, probably 9 do not know the meaning of a free people's state, or why an attack on this slogan means an attack on opportunists. This is how history is written. This is how a great revolutionary teaching is imperceptibly falsified and adapted to prevailing Philistinism. The conclusion directed against the anarchists has been repeated thousands of times. It has been vulgarized and rammed into people's heads in the shallowest form, and has acquired the strength of a prejudice, whereas the conclusion directed against the opportunists has been obscured and forgotten. The Free People's State was a program demand and a catchword current among the German Social Democrats in the 1870s. This catchword is devoid of all political content, except that it describes the concept of democracy in a pompous Philistine fashion, insofar as it hinted in a legally permissible manner at a democratic republic. Engels was prepared to, quote, justify its use, quote, for a time, from an agitational point of view. But it was an opportunist catchword, for it amounted to something more than prettifying bourgeois democracy, and was also failure to understand the socialist criticism of the state in general. We are in favor of a democratic republic as the best form of state for the proletariat under capitalism, but we have no right to forget that wage slavery is the lot of the people, even in the most democratic bourgeois republic. Furthermore, every state is a, quote, special force for the suppression of the oppressed class. Consequently, every state is not free and not a people's state. Marx and Engels explained this repeatedly to their party comrades in the 70s. Fifthly, the same work of Engels, whose arguments about the withering away of the state everyone remembers, also contains an argument of the significance of violent revolution. Engels' historical analysis of its role becomes a veritable panegyric on violent revolution. This, quote, no one remembers. It is not done in modern socialist parties to talk or even think about the significance of this idea, and it plays no part whatsoever in their daily propaganda and agitation among the people. And yet, it is inseparably bound up with the withering away of the state into one harmonious whole. Here is Engels' argument. Quote, that force, however, plays yet another role, other than that of a diabolical power. In history, a revolutionary role, that, in the words of Marx, it is the midwife of every old society, which is pregnant with a new one, that it is the instrument with which social movement forces its way through and shatters the dead, fossilized political forms. Of this, there is not a word in Herr Düring. It is only with sighs and groans that he admits the possibility that force will perhaps be necessary for the overthrow of an economy based on exploitation. Unfortunately, because all use of force demoralizes, he says, the person who uses it. And this in Germany, where a violent collision, which may after all be forced on the people, would at least have the advantage of wiping out the servility which has penetrated the nation's mentality following the humiliation of the 30 Years' War. And this person's mode of thought, dull, insipid, and impotent, presumes to impose itself on the most revolutionary party that history has ever known. Unquote. How can this panegyric on violent revolution, which Engels insistently brought to the attention of the German Social Democrats between 1878 and 1894, i.e. right up to the time of his death, be combined with the theory of the withering away of the state to form a single theory? Usually the two are combined by means of eclecticism, by an unprincipled or sophistic selection made arbitrarily, or to please the powers that be, of first one, then another argument, and in 99 cases out of 100, if not more, it is the idea of the withering away that is placed in the forefront. Dialectics are replaced by eclecticism. This is the most usual, most widespread practice to be met with in present-day official social democratic literature in relation to Marxism. This sort of substitution is of course nothing new. It was observed even in the history of classical Greek philosophy. In falsifying Marxism in opportunist fashion, the substitution of eclecticism for dialectics is the easiest way of deceiving the people. It gives an illusory satisfaction. It seems to take into account all sides of the process, all trends of development, all the conflicting influences, and so forth, whereas in reality, it provides no integral and revolutionary conception of the process of social development at all. We have already said above, and shall show more fully later, that the theory of Marx and Engels of the inevitability of a violent revolution refers to the bourgeois state. The latter cannot be superseded by the proletarian state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, through the process of withering away, but as a general rule, only through a violent revolution. The panegyric Engels sang in its honor, and which fully corresponds to Marx's repeated statements, see the concluding passages of The Poverty of Philosophy and the Communist Manifesto, with their proud and open proclamation of the inevitability of a violent revolution. See what Marx wrote nearly 30 years later in criticizing the Gotha program of 1875, when he mercilessly castigated the opportunist character of that program. This panegyric is by no means a mere impulse, a mere declamation, or a polemical sally. The necessity of systematically imbuing the masses with this, and precisely this view of violent revolution, lies at the root of the entire theory of Marx and Engels. The betrayal of their theory by the now prevailing social chauvinist and Kautskyite trends expresses itself strikingly in both these trends, ignoring such propaganda and agitation. The supersession of the bourgeois state by the proletarian state is impossible without a violent revolution. The abolition of the proletarian state, i.e., of the state in general, is impossible except through the process of withering away. A detailed and concrete elaboration of these views was given by Marx and Engels when they studied each particular revolutionary situation, when they analyzed the lessons of the experience of each particular revolution. We shall now pass to this, undoubtedly the most important part of their theory. That's the end of chapter 1. I'd just like to comment briefly. Just the other day, as I'm recording this, I recorded a very long commentary on the early 2021 Richard Wolff and Destiny streamer debate. And this is more or less what I was saying about Richard Wolff. We can build a lot of co-ops and eventually capitalism will just go away. That's directly what Lenin is speaking against here. Every time I've ever heard Richard Wolff in particular pinned down, whether it was in that conversation or his appearance on Fox News or any time he gets asked about, but hey, you say that you're a Marxist. That means you want, some kind of force to be used against the bourgeoisie. And whenever he is asked that directly, he always denies it. He always says, no. We're talking about a change of systems and we can just, phase it up. Anyway, that, to me, at least, is exactly what Lenin is talking about. Do you have another view? Leave a comment. Okay, continuing on to Chapter 2, the experience of 1848 to 1851. Section 1, the eve of revolution. The first works of mature Marxism, The Poverty of Philosophy and the Communist Manifesto, appeared just on the eve of the Revolution of 1848. For this reason, in addition to presenting the general principles of Marxism, they reflect to a certain degree the concrete revolutionary situation of the time. It will therefore be more expedient, perhaps, to examine what the authors of these works said about the state immediately before they drew conclusions from the experience of the years 1848 to 1851.
I'm
In
gonna
The
do my
Poverty of
planks, which
Philosophy, Marx wrote,
sucks.
quote, "The working class, in the course of development, will
fucking wanna have
substitute
to
for
do
the
this,
old
man.
bourgeois society an association
People are
which will
probably
preclude
selling them
classes
for a
and
lot.
their antagonism, and there will be no more political power groups, since the political power is precisely the official expression of class antagonism in bourgeois society," unquote. It is instructive to compare this general exposition of the idea of the state disappearing after the abolition of classes with the exposition contained in the Communist Manifesto, written by Marx and Engels a few months later, in November 1847 to be exact. Quote, "In depicting the most general phases of the development of the proletariat, we traced the more or less veiled civil war, raging within existing society up to the point where that war breaks out into open revolution, and where the violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie lays the foundation for the sway of the proletariat." Quoting again, "We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class to win the battle of democracy." Quoting again, "The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degree,
Let's do this.
all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible."
Is nobody selling these right now?
Here we have a formulation of one of the most remarkable
Let's
and
go.
most important ideas of Marxism on the subject of the state, namely the idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat, as
that's
Marx
only
and
gonna make me
Engels
20
began to call it after the Paris Commune.
I'm gonna need
And
so
also,
many more.
a highly interesting definition of the state, which is also one of the forgotten words of Marxism, quote, "the state, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class." This definition of the state has never been explained in the prevailing propaganda and agitation literature of the official social democratic parties. More than that, it has been deliberately ignored, for it is absolutely irreconcilable with reformism and is a slap in the face for the common opportunist prejudices and Philistine illusions about the, quote, "peaceful development of democracy." The proletariat needs the state. This is repeated by all the opportunists, social chauvinists, and Kautskyeites who assure us that this is what Marx taught. But they, quote, "forget to add that, in the first place, according to Marx, the proletariat needs only a state which is withering away, i.e. a state so constituted that it begins to wither away immediately and cannot but wither away. And secondly, the working people need a, quote,
easy,
state, i.e. the
easy,
proletariat
easy.
organized as the ruling class. The state is a special organization of force. It is an organization of violence for the suppression of some class. What class must the proletariat suppress? Naturally, only the exploiting class, i.e. the bourgeoisie. The working people need the state only to suppress the resistance of the exploiters, and only the proletariat can direct this suppression, can carry it out. For the proletariat is the only class that is consistently revolutionary, the only class that can unite all the working and exploited people in the struggle against the bourgeoisie, in completely removing it. The exploited classes need political rule to maintain exploitation, i.e., in the selfish interests of an insignificant minority against the vast majority of all people. The exploited classes need political rule in order to completely abolish all exploitation, i.e., in the interests of the vast majority of the people, and against the insignificant minority consisting of the modern slave owners, the landowners, and capitalists. The petty bourgeois Democrats, those sham socialists, who replaced the class struggle by dreams of class harmony, even pictured the socialist transformation in a dreamy fashion, not as the overthrow of the rule of the exploiting class, but as the peaceful submission of the minority to the majority, which has become aware of its aims. This petty bourgeois utopia, which is inseparable from the idea of the state being above classes, led in practice to the betrayal of the interests of the working classes, as was shown, for example, by the history of the French revolutions of 1848 and 1871, and by the experience of, quote, socialist participation in bourgeois cabinets in Britain, France, Italy, and other countries at the turn of the century. All his life, Marx fought against this petty bourgeois socialism, now revived in Russia by the Socialist Revolutionary and Menshevik parties. He developed his theory of the class struggle consistently, down to the theory of political power, of the state. The overthrow of bourgeois rule can be accomplished only by the proletariat, the particular class whose economic conditions of existence prepare it for this task, and provide it with the possibility and the power to perform it. While the bourgeoisie break up and disintegrate the peasantry and all the petty bourgeois groups, they weld together, unite, and organize the proletariat. Only the proletariat, by virtue of the economic role it plays in large-scale production, is capable of being the leader of all the working and exploited people, whom the bourgeoisie exploit, oppress, and crush, often not less, but more than they do the proletarians, but who are incapable of waging an independent struggle for their emancipation. The theory of class struggle, applied by Marx to the question of the state and the socialist revolution, leads as a matter of course to the recognition of the political rule of the proletariat, of its dictatorship, i.e., of undivided power directly backed by the armed force of the people. The overthrow of the bourgeoisie can be achieved only by the proletariat becoming the ruling class, capable of crushing the inevitable and desperate resistance of the bourgeoisie, and of organizing all the working and exploited people for the new economic system. The proletariat needs state power, a centralized organization of force, an organization of violence, both to crush the resistance of the exploiters and to lead the enormous mass of the population, the peasants, the petty bourgeoisie, and semi-proletarians, in the work of organizing a socialist economy. By educating the Workers' Party, Marxism educates the vanguard of the proletariat, capable of assuming power and leading the whole people to socialism, of directing and organizing the new system, of being the teacher, the guide, the leader of all the working and exploited people in organizing their social life without the bourgeoisie and against the bourgeoisie. By contrast, the opportunism now prevailing trains the members of the Workers' Party to be the representatives of the better paid workers, who lose touch with the masses, get along fairly well under capitalism, and sell their birthright for a massive pottage, i.e., renounce their role as revolutionary leaders of the people against the bourgeoisie. Marx's theory of, quote, the state, i.e. the proletariat organized as the ruling class, is inseparably bound up with the whole of his doctrine of the revolutionary role of the proletariat in history. The culmination of this rule is the proletarian dictatorship, the political rule of the proletariat. But since the proletariat needs the state as a special form of organization of violence against the bourgeoisie, the following conclusion suggests itself. Is it conceivable that such an organization can be created without first abolishing, destroying the state machine created by the bourgeoisie for themselves? The Communist Manifesto leads straight to this conclusion, and it is of this conclusion that Marx speaks when summing up the experience of the Revolution of 1848 to 1851. End of section 1, moving on to section 2, the Revolution summed up. Marx sums up his conclusions from the Revolution of 1848 to 51 on the subject of the state we are concerned with in the following argument contained in the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, quote, "But the revolution is thoroughgoing. It is still journeying through purgatory. It does its work methodically. By December 2, 1851, the day of Louis Bonaparte's coup d'etat, it had completed one half of its preparatory work. It is now completing the other half. First, it perfected the parliamentary power in order to be able to overthrow it. Now that it has attained this, it is perfecting the executive power, reducing it to its purest expression, isolating it, setting it up against itself as the sole object, in order to concentrate all its forces of destruction against it. And when it has done this second half of its preliminary work, Europe will leap from its seat and exultantly exclaim, 'Well grubbed, old mole.'" Quoting again, "This executive power, with its enormous bureaucratic and military organization, with its vast and ingenious state machinery, with a host of officials numbering 500,000, besides an army of another 500,000, this appalling parasitic body, which enmeshes the body of French society and chokes all its pores, sprang up in the days of the absolute monarchy, with the decay of the feudal system, which it helped to hasten. The first French Revolution developed centralization, but at the same time, it increased the extent, the attributes, and the number of agents of governmental power. Napoleon completed this state machinery. The legitimate monarchy and the July monarchy added nothing but a greater division of labor." Quoting again, "Finally, in its struggle against the revolution, the parliamentary republic found itself compelled to strengthen, along with repressive
Scraping
measures,
up the last bits of my
resources
weed,
and centralization of governmental power.
which is
All
legal in the
revolutions
state.
perfected this machine instead of smashing it. The
Just
parties
figured I'd
that
say that.
contended in turn for domination regarded the possession of this huge state edifice as the principal spoils of the victor." Unquote. In this remarkable argument, Marxism takes a tremendous step forward compared with the Communist Manifesto. In the latter, the question of the state is still treated in an extremely abstract manner, in the most general terms and expressions. In the above quoted passage, the question is treated in a concrete manner, and the conclusion is extremely precise, definite, practical, and palpable. All previous revolutions perfected the state machine, whereas it must be broken, smashed. This conclusion is the chief and fundamental point in the Marxist theory of the state, and it is precisely this fundamental point which has been completely ignored by the dominant official social democratic parties, and indeed distorted, as we shall see later, by the foremost theoretician of the Second International, Karl Kautsky. The Communist Manifesto gives a general summary of history, which compels us to regard the state as the organ of class rule, and leads us to the inevitable conclusion that the proletariat cannot overthrow the bourgeoisie without first winning political power, without attaining political supremacy, without transforming the state into the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and that this proletarian state will begin to wither away immediately after its victory, because the state is unnecessary and cannot exist in a society in which there are no class antagonisms. The question as to how, from the point of view of historical development, the replacement of the bourgeois by the proletarian state is to take place is not raised here. This is the question Marx raises and answers in 1852. True to his philosophy of dialectical materialism, Marx takes as his basis the historical experience of the great years of revolution, 1848 to 1851. Here, as everywhere else, his theory is a summing up of experience, illuminated by a profound philosophical conception of the world and a rich knowledge of history. The problem of the state is put specifically. How did the bourgeois state, the state machine necessary for the rule of the bourgeoisie, come into being historically? What changes did it undergo? What evolution did it perform in the course of bourgeois revolutions and in the face of the independent actions of the oppressed classes? What are the tasks of the proletariat in relation to this state machine? The centralized state power that is peculiar to bourgeois society came into being in the period of the fall of absolutism. Two institutions most characteristic of this state machine are the bureaucracy and the standing army. In their works, Marx and Engels repeatedly show that the bourgeoisie are connected with these institutions by thousands of threads. Every worker's experience illustrates this connection in an extremely graphic and impressive manner. From its own bitter experience, the working class learns to recognize this connection. That is why it so easily grasps and so firmly learns the doctrine, which shows the inevitability of this connection, a doctrine which the petty bourgeois Democrats either ignorantly and flippantly deny, or still more flippantly admit in general, while forgetting to draw appropriate practical conclusions. The bureaucracy and the standing army are a parasite on the body of bourgeois society, a parasite created by the internal antagonisms which rend that society, but a parasite which chokes all its vital pores. The Kautskyite opportunism now prevailing in official social democracy considers the view that the state is a parasitic organism to be the peculiar and exclusive attribute of anarchism. It goes without saying that this distortion of Marxism is a vast advantage to those Philistines who have reduced socialism to the unheard-of disgrace of justifying and prettifying the imperialist war by applying to it the concept of, quote, the defense of the fatherland. But it is unquestionably a distortion nevertheless. The development, perfection, and strengthening of the bureaucratic and military apparatus proceeded during all the numerous bourgeois revolutions which Europe has witnessed since the fall of feudalism. In particular, it is the petty bourgeois who are attracted to the side of the big bourgeoisie and are largely subordinated to them through this apparatus, which provides the upper sections of the peasants, small artisans, tradesmen, and the like with comparatively comfortable, quiet, and respectable jobs, raising the holders above the people. Consider what happened in Russia during the 6 months following February 27, 1917. The official posts which formerly were given by preference to the Black Hundreds, comment extreme reactionaries and monarchists, have now become the spoils of the cadets, comment the major bourgeois party, Mensheviks, and social revolutionaries. Nobody has really thought of introducing any serious reforms. Every effort has been made to put them off, quote, until the Constituent Assembly meets, and to steadily put off its convocation until after the war. But there has been no delay, no waiting for the Constituent Assembly, in the matter of dividing the spoils of getting the lucrative jobs of ministers, deputy ministers, governors general, etc., etc. The game of combinations that has been played in forming the government has been, in essence, only an expression of this division and redivision of the spoils, which has been going on above and below throughout the country in every department of central and local government. The 6 months between February 27 and August 27, 1917, can be summed up, objectively summed up beyond all dispute, as follows. Reforms shelved, distribution of official jobs accomplished, and mistakes in the distribution corrected by a few redistributions. But the more the bureaucratic apparatus is, quote, redistributed among the various bourgeois and petty bourgeois parties, among the cadets, socialist revolutionaries, and Mensheviks in the case of Russia, the more keenly aware the oppressed classes and the proletariat at their head become of their irreconcilable hostility to the whole of bourgeois society. Hence the need for all bourgeois parties, even for the most democratic and, quote, revolutionary democratic among them, to intensify repressive measures against the revolutionary proletariat, to strengthen the apparatus of coercion, i.e. the state machine. This course of events compels the revolution, quote, to concentrate all its forces of destruction against the state power, and to set itself the aim not of improving the state machine, but of smashing and destroying it. It was not logical reasoning, but actual developments, the actual experience of 1848 to 51, that led to the matter being presented in this way, the extent to which Marx held strictly to the solid ground of historical experience can be seen from the fact that in 1852, he did not yet specifically raise the question of what was to take the place of the state machine to be destroyed. Experience had not yet provided material for dealing with this question, which history placed on the agenda later on in 1871. Comment the Paris Commune. In 1852, all that could be established with the accuracy of scientific observation was that the proletarian revolution had approached the task of concentrating all its forces of destruction against the state power, of smashing the state machine. Here the question may arise, is it correct to generalize the experience, observations, and conclusions of Marx, to apply them to a field that is wider than the history of France during the 3 years 1848 to 51? Before proceeding to deal with this question, let us recall a remark made by Engels, and then examine the facts. In his introduction to the third edition of the 18th Brumaire, Engels wrote, quote, "France is the country where, more than anywhere else, the historical class struggles were each time fought out to a finish, and where, consequently, the changing political forms within which they move and in which their results are summarized have been stamped in the sharpest outlines. The center of feudalism in the Middle Ages, the model country since the Renaissance of a unified monarchy based on social estates. France demolished feudalism in the Great Revolution and established the rule of the bourgeoisie in a classical purity unequaled by any other European land. And the struggle of the upward-striving proletariat against the ruling bourgeoisie appeared here in an acute form unknown elsewhere." Unquote. The last remark is out of date insomuch as since 1871 there has been a lull in the revolutionary struggle of the French proletariat, although, long as this lull may be, it does not at all preclude the possibility that in the coming proletarian revolution, France may show herself to be the classic country of the class struggle to a finish. Let us, however, cast a general glance over the history of the advanced countries at the turn of the century. We shall see that the same process went on more slowly, in more varied forms, in a much wider field. On the one hand, the development of parliamentary power, both in the republican countries, France, America, Switzerland, and in the monarchies, Britain, Germany to a certain extent, Italy, the Scandinavian countries, etc. On the other hand, a struggle for power among the various bourgeois and petty bourgeois parties, which distributed and redistributed the spoils of office, with the foundations of bourgeois society unchanged, and, lastly, the perfection and consolidation of the executive power, of its bureaucratic and military apparatus. There is not the slightest doubt that these features are common to the whole of the modern evolution of all capitalist states in general. In the last 3 years, 1848 to 51, France displayed in a swift, sharp, concentrated form the very same processes of development which are peculiar to the whole capitalist world. Imperialism, the era of bank capital, the era of gigantic capitalist monopolies, of the development of monopoly capitalism into state monopoly capitalism, has clearly shown an unprecedented growth in its bureaucratic and military apparatus in connection with the intensification of repressive measures against the proletariat, both in the monarchical and in the freest republican countries. World history is now undoubtedly leading, on an incomparably larger scale than in 1852, to the concentration of all forces of the proletarian revolution on the destruction of the state machine. What the proletariat will put in its place is suggested by the highly instructive material furnished by the Paris Commune. That's the end of section 2. Beginning section 3, the presentation of the question by Marx in 1852. In 1907, Mehring, in the magazine Neue Zeit, volume 25, published extracts from Marx's letter to Wedemeyer, dated March 5, 1852. This letter, among other things, contains the following remarkable observation, quote, "And now as to myself, no credit is due to me for discovering the existence of classes in modern society or the struggle between them. Long before me, bourgeois historians had described the historical development of this class struggle, and bourgeois economists the economic anatomy of classes. What I did that was new was to prove, one, that the existence of classes is only bound up with the particular historical phases in the development of production, two, that the class struggle necessarily leads to the dictatorship of the proletariat, three, that this dictatorship itself only constitutes the transition to the abolition of all classes and to a classless society." Unquote. In these words, Marx succeeded in expressing with striking clarity, first, the chief and radical difference between his theory and that of the foremost and most profound thinkers of the bourgeoisie, and secondly, the essence of his theory of the state. It is often said and written that the main point in Marx's theory is the class struggle, but this is wrong. And this wrong notion very often results in an opportunist distortion of Marxism and its falsification in a spirit acceptable to the bourgeoisie. For the theory of the class struggle was created not by Marx, but by the bourgeoisie before Marx, and, generally speaking, it is acceptable to the bourgeoisie. Those who recognize only the class struggle are not yet Marxists. They may be found to be still within the bounds of bourgeois thinking and bourgeois politics. To confine Marxism to the theory of the class struggle means curtailing Marxism, distorting it, reducing it to something acceptable to the bourgeoisie. Only he is a Marxist who extends the recognition of the class struggle to the recognition of the dictatorship of the proletariat. That is what constitutes the most profound distinction between the Marxist and the ordinary petty as well as big bourgeois. This is the touchstone on which the real understanding and recognition of Marxism should be tested. And it is not surprising that when the history of Europe brought the working class face to face with this question as a practical issue, not only all the opportunists and reformists, but all the Kautskyites, people who vacillate between reformism and Marxism, proved to be miserable Philistines and petty bourgeois Democrats, repudiating the dictatorship of the proletariat. Kautsky's pamphlet, The Dictatorship of the Proletariat, published in August 1918, i.e. long after the first edition of the present book, is a perfect example of petty bourgeois distortion of Marxism and base renunciation of it in deeds, while hypocritically recognizing it in words. See my pamphlet, The Proletarian Revolution and the Renegade Kautsky. Opportunism today, as represented by its principal spokesman, the ex-Marxist Karl Kautsky, fits in completely with Marx's characterization of the bourgeois position quoted above, for this opportunism limits recognition of the class struggle to the sphere of bourgeois relations. Within this sphere, within its framework, not a single educated liberal will refuse to recognize the class struggle in principle. Opportunism does not extend recognition of the class struggle to the cardinal point, to the period of transition from capitalism to communism, of the overthrow and the complete abolition of the bourgeoisie. In reality, this period inevitably is a period of an unprecedentedly violent class struggle in unprecedentedly acute forms, and consequently, during this period, the state must inevitably be a state that is democratic in a new way, for the proletariat and the propertyless in general, and dictatorial in a new way against the bourgeoisie. Further, the essence of Marx's theory of the state has been mastered only by those who realize that the dictatorship of a single class is necessary not only for every class society in general, not only for the proletariat, which has overthrown the bourgeoisie, but also for the entire historical period which separates capitalism from, quote, classless society from communism. Bourgeois states are most varied in form, but their essence is the same. All these states, whatever their form, in the final analysis, are inevitably the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. The transition from capitalism to communism is certainly bound to yield a tremendous abundance and variety of political forms, but the essence will inevitably be the same, the dictatorship of the proletariat. That ends Chapter 2, now beginning Chapter 3, Experience of the Paris Commune of 1871, Marx's Analysis. Section 1. What made the Communards' attempt heroic? It is well known that in the autumn of 1870, a few months before the Commune, Marx warned the Paris workers that any attempt to overthrow the government would be the folly of despair. But when, in March 1871, a decisive battle was forced upon the workers, and they accepted it, when the uprising had become a fact, Marx greeted the proletarian revolution with the greatest enthusiasm, in spite of unfavorable auguries. Marx did not persist in the pedantic attitude of condemning a, quote, untimely movement, as did the ill-famed Russian renegade from Marxism, Plekhanov, who in November 1905 wrote encouragingly about the workers' and peasants' struggle, but after December 1905, comment the First Russian Revolution, cried, liberal fashion, quote, they should not have taken up arms. Marx, however, was not only enthusiastic about the heroism of the communards, who, as he expressed it, quote, stormed heaven. Comment, the communards are the people who did the Paris Commune. Although the mass revolutionary movement did not achieve its aim, he regarded it as a historic experience of enormous importance, as a certain advance of the world proletarian revolution, as a practical step that was more important than hundreds of programs and arguments. Marx endeavored to analyze this experiment, to draw tactical lessons from it, and to re-examine his theory in the light of it. The only, quote, correction Marx thought it necessary to make to the Communist Manifesto, he made on the basis of the revolutionary experience of the Paris Commune. The last preface to the new German edition of the Communist Manifesto, signed by both its authors, is dated June 24, 1872. In this preface, the authors, Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, say that the program of the Communist Manifesto, quote, has in some details become out of date. And they go on to say, quote, one thing especially was proved by the Commune, viz., that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes, unquote. The authors took the words that are in single quotation marks in this passage from Marx's book, The Civil War in France. Thus, Marx and Engels regarded one principal and fundamental lesson of the Paris Commune as being of such enormous importance that they introduced it as an important correction into the Communist Manifesto. Most characteristically, it is this important correction that has been distorted by the opportunists. Comment, I had this very conversation with people on Twitter last year. It is definitely still going on to this day. Continuing. And its meaning probably is not known to 9/10, if not 99/100ths, of the readers of the Communist Manifesto. We shall deal with this distortion more fully farther on, in a chapter devoted specially to distortions. Here it will be sufficient to note that the current vulgar, quote, interpretation of Marx's famous statement just quoted is that Marx here allegedly emphasizes the idea of slow development, in contradistinction to the seizure of power, and so on. As a matter of fact, the exact opposite is the case. Marx's idea is that the working class must break up, smash the, quote, ready-made state machinery, and not confine itself merely to laying hold of it. On April 12, 1871, i.e. just at the time of the Commune, Marx wrote to Kugelmann, quote, if you look up the last chapter of my 18th Brumaire, you will find that I declare that the next attempt of the French Revolution will be no longer, as before, to transfer the bureaucratic military machine from one hand to another, but to smash it. And this is the precondition for every real people's revolution on the continent. And this is what our heroic party comrades in Paris are attempting, unquote. The words, to smash the bureaucratic military machine, briefly express the principal lesson of Marxism regarding the tasks of the proletariat during a revolution in relation to the state. And this is the lesson that has been not only completely ignored, but positively distorted by the prevailing Kautskyite, quote, interpretation of Marxism. Comment, pretty much every time that Lenin writes interpretation here, meaning distortion, not a valid interpretation or an honest interpretation, it is in quotes, meant sarcastically. Continuing. As for Marx's reference to the 18th Brumaire, we have quoted the relevant passage in full above. It is interesting to note, in particular, 2 points in the above-quoted argument of Marx. First, he restricts his conclusion to the continent. This was understandable in 1871, when Britain was still the model of a purely capitalist country, but without a militarist clique, and to a considerable degree without a bureaucracy. Marx therefore excluded Britain, where a revolution, even a people's revolution, then seemed possible, and indeed was possible, without the precondition of destroying ready-made state machinery. Today, in 1917, at the time of the first great imperialist war, this restriction made by Marx is no longer valid. Both Britain and America, the biggest and the last representatives in the whole world of Anglo-Saxon, quote, liberty, in the sense that they had no militarist cliques and bureaucracy, have completely sunk into the all-European, filthy, bloody morass of bureaucratic military institutions which subordinate everything to themselves and suppress everything today. today in Britain and America too, quote, the precondition for every real people's revolution is the smashing, the destruction of the ready-made state machinery, made and brought up to the European general imperialist perfection in those countries in the years 1914 to 17. Comment. So Lenin is saying here that World War I, 1914 to 1917, is what made all the advanced capitalist countries into this form of bureaucratic military institutions with the full standing army, etc. Now, I say sometimes that it's my prediction that the United States will be the last country on earth to go socialist, in part because pretty much the entire global imperialist system has put all of its eggs in this basket. The U.S. is that standing army that does all the heavy lifting for global imperialism. How is the proletariat of the United States to try to smash the massive military-industrial complex? I think it might take the entire world to do that. I mean, maybe it won't, and, you know, the sooner it comes down, the better. The sooner we can have peace, because they're really just there to enforce inequality, you know, as the dictatorship of the international imperialist bourgeoisie. And one other point before moving on. Lenin talks here about the sort of old-school capitalists who ruled Britain before the establishment of this new military bureaucratic machine. If you go through U.S. history, you can hear various warnings against the standing army from capitalists and slaveholders, like the bourgeoisie of their day. But it's just capitalism had not evolved to the state yet. So you'll see reactionaries and people who aren't socialists, don't have, class consciousness, etc., referencing some of these things. And it's like, well, George Washington warned against a standing army. And, okay, that doesn't mean we should adopt the politics of George Washington, however, which are hopelessly out of date and don't apply to our class situation. Anyway, that's a conversation for another time. Continuing. Secondly, particular attention should be paid to Marx's extremely profound remark that the destruction of the bureaucratic military state machine is, quote, the precondition for every real people's revolution. The idea of a people's revolution seems strange coming from Marx, so that the Russian Plekhanovites and Mensheviks, those followers of Struve who wish to be regarded as Marxists, might possibly declare such an expression to be a slip of the pen on Marx's part. They have reduced Marxism to such a state of wretchedly liberal distortion that nothing exists for them beyond the antithesis between bourgeois revolution and proletarian revolution, and even this antithesis they interpret in an utterly lifeless way. If we take the revolutions of the 20th century as examples, we shall of course have to admit that the Portuguese and the Turkish revolutions are both bourgeois revolutions. Neither of them, however, is a people's revolution, since in neither does the mass of the people, their vast majority, come out actively, independently, with their own economic and political demands to any noticeable degree. By contrast, although the Russian bourgeois revolution of 1905 to 07 displayed no such brilliant successes as at time fell to the Portuguese and Turkish revolutions, it was undoubtedly a, quote, real people's revolution, since the mass of the people, their majority, the very lowest social groups, crushed by oppression and exploitation, rose independently and stamped on the entire course of the revolution the imprint of their own demands, their attempt to build in their own way a new society in place of the old society that was being destroyed. In Europe, in 1871, the proletariat did not constitute the majority of the people in any country on the continent. A, quote, people's revolution, one actually sweeping the majority into its stream, could be such only if it embraced both the proletariat and the peasants. These two classes then constituted the people. These two classes are united by the fact that the bureaucratic military state machine oppresses, crushes, exploits them. To smash this machine, to break it up, is truly in the interest of the people, of the majority, of the workers and most of the peasants, is the precondition for a free alliance of the poor peasant and the proletarians, whereas without such an alliance, democracy is unstable, and socialist transformation is impossible. As is well known, the Paris Commune was actually working its way towards such an alliance, although it did not reach its goal owing to a number of circumstances, internal and external. Consequently, in speaking of a real people's revolution, Marx, without in the least discounting the special features of the petty bourgeois, he spoke a great deal about them, and often, took strict account of the actual balance of class forces in most of the continental countries of Europe in 1871. On the other hand, he stated that the smashing of the state machine was required by the interests of both the workers and the peasants, that it united them, that it placed before them the common task of removing the parasite and of replacing it by something new. By what exactly? That's the end of section 1. On to section 2. What is to replace the smashed state machine? In 1847, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx's answer to this question was as yet a purely abstract one. To be exact, it was an answer that indicated the tasks, but not the ways of accomplishing them. The answer given in the Communist Manifesto was that this machine was to be replaced by, quote, the proletariat organized as the ruling class, by the, quote, winning of the battle of democracy, unquote. Marx did not indulge in utopias. He expected the experience of the mass movement to provide the reply to the question as to the specific forms this organization of the proletariat as the ruling class would assume, and as to the exact manner in which this organization would be combined with the most complete, most consistent, quote, winning of the battle of democracy. Marx subjected the experience of the Commune, meager as it was, to the most careful analysis in the Civil War in France. Let us quote the most important passages of this work. Quote, originating from the Middle Ages, there developed in the 19th century the centralized state power, with its ubiquitous organs of standing army, police, bureaucracy, clergy, and judicature. With the development of class antagonisms between capital and labor, state power assumed more and more the character of a public force organized for the suppression of the working class, of a machine of class rule. After every revolution, which marks an advance in the class struggle, the purely coercive character of the state power stands out in bolder and bolder relief. After the revolution of 1848 to 49, state power became, quote, the national war instruments of capital against labor. The Second Empire consolidated this. The direct antithesis to the empire was the commune. It was the specific form of a republic that was not only to remove the monarchical form of class rule, but class rule itself, unquote. What was this specific form of the proletarian socialist republic? What was the state it began to create? Quote, the first decree of the commune, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people, unquote. This demand now figures in the program of every party calling itself socialist. The real worth of their program, however, is best shown by the behavior of our social revolutionists and Mensheviks, who right after the revolution of February 27 refused to carry out this demand. Quote, the commune was formed of the municipal councillors, chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at any time. The majority of its members were naturally working men, or acknowledged representatives of the working class. The police, which until then had been the instrument of the government, was at once stripped of its political attributes and turned into the responsible and at all times revocable agent of the commune. So were the officials of all other branches of the administration. From the members of the commune downwards, the public service had to be done at workmen's wages. The privileges and the representation allowances of the high dignitaries of state disappeared along with the high dignitaries themselves. Having once got rid of the standing army and the police, the instruments of physical force of the old government, the commune proceeded at once to break the instrument of spiritual suppression, the power of the priests. The judicial functionaries lost that sham independence. They were thenceforth to be elective, responsible, and revocable, unquote. The commune, therefore, appears to have replaced the smashed state machine, quote, only by fuller democracy, abolition of the standing army, all officials to be elected and subject to recall. But as a matter of fact, this, quote, only signifies a gigantic replacement of certain institutions by other institutions of a fundamentally different type. This is exactly a case of, quote, quantity being transformed into quality. Democracy, introduced as fully and consistently as is at all conceivable, is transformed from bourgeois into proletarian democracy, from the state, meaning a special force for the suppression of a particular class, into something which is no longer the state proper. It is still necessary to suppress the bourgeoisie and crush their resistance. This was particularly necessary for the Commune, and one of the reasons for its defeat was that it did not do this with sufficient determination. The organ of suppression, however, is here the majority of the population, and not a minority, as was always the case under slavery, serfdom, and wage slavery. And since the majority of people itself suppresses its oppressors, a special force for suppression is no longer necessary. In this sense, the state begins to wither away. Instead of the special institutions of a privileged minority, privileged officialdom, the chiefs of the standing army, the majority itself can directly fulfill all these functions, and the more the functions of state power are performed by the people as a whole, the less need there is for the existence of this power. In this connection, the following measures of the Commune, emphasized by Marx, are particularly noteworthy: the abolition of all representation allowances and of all monetary privileges to officials, the reduction of the remuneration of all servants of the state to the level of workmen's wages. This shows more clearly than anything else the turn from bourgeois to proletarian democracy, from the democracy of the oppressors to that of the oppressed classes, from the state as a, quote, special force for the suppression of a particular class to the suppression of the oppressors by the general force of the majority of the people, the workers and the peasants. And it is on this particularly striking point, perhaps the most important as far as the problem of the state is concerned,